awaken the people and help them to see the evil doings of Israel and the United States.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day, good whatever time it is where you're listening to this podcast. We have with us a special guest today. Ahnaf and I frequently talk about warlords, and this time we have a warlord from Mars, John Carter, coming to us from Mars by way of Canada. Say hello, John.
Hey, Kenaz. Ahnaf. Nice to be here.
Hello,
Thank you for having me.
Hello, fantastic.
Thank you.
We
Thank
are...
you, good sir. No. It's our honor and privilege to have you on. But no, good day to Sir Kenaz. Morning for you two fine gents, I think. Actually, no, Sir John is in Central Europe. So yeah, afternoon for myself, and morning for Sir Kenaz. But no, like Sir John, we read your stuff all the time. I was gonna actually talk about Hector Saves His Dad because it's a de-industrial short story, and I'm into that stuff all the time. Like I got every issue of Into the Ruins, and the other one is New Maps. So I'm into that stuff. I really liked your one. I was actually thinking, maybe Sir John should send it over to those guys and have it published or what have you, right? But no, like, and the reason I like Hector Saves His Dad is because we need more short stories like that. Because nowadays it's just like, people talk about this, oh, we're gonna go into space, we'll build the giant robot or whatever, and I just shake my head. I'm like, okay, bro, give me a more realistic story. That's not going to happen, right? And, I know Sir John disagrees with me on that one, but I always felt that fiction is a medium where you have to kind of play around with the rules a bit, but not to the point where you break them, right? If that makes sense. You can kind of bend the rules of the world you're living in, but if you break them, then it just becomes too much of a foreign thing. But no, Sir John, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, I definitely disagree about going into space and building robots. I think that's observably already happening. Yeah, in terms of fiction, obviously, I mean, like you need to maintain suspension of disbelief with the reader. So, once you've established like an internal rule for your world, like you need to follow that unless, you have you were able to introduce a reason that the rule can be broken because maybe the main character has like a breakthrough in his understanding of the world, and now he can do things that previously were thought to be impossible, and that can be used to great dramatic effect. But you can't just kind of do it willy-nilly, obviously. So Hector Saves His Dad. That that's like some dystopian short fiction. And dystopias aren't necessarily prophecies of how you think the world is going to happen, is going to unfold in the future. It's more a way of exploring our nightmares about, the worst case possible scenarios about how things could degenerate.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So sort of, in the background of that one, you've got this sort of depopulated world, and it's referenced that like partway through during some rather clumsy exposition actually I sort of have one of the characters explain that it wasn't any one thing that did it, that there were a number of effects, a number of influences that sort of wore away at the world's population to the point where the cities are now largely uninhabited and thus not maintained. Everything's kind of falling apart. And that isn't, I think, completely impossible. So obviously, birth rates, for example, are,
absolutely
well below replacement in like pretty much throughout the entirety of the civilized world. People are talking about that a lot. Is right. So I can't really claim to have been totally original there. I was partly inspired by a William Gibson. Yeah, so there was The Peripheral, which was an Amazon Prime show that only survived, sadly, one season. It was really, I thought, absolutely excellent. And in the future depicted there, it's very sort of similar. It's like, the species has been massively thinned out by a whole series of catastrophes, wars, famines, climate change, plagues, sort of everything. And but civilization does still sort of carry on. I mean, they still have advanced technology, in fact, much more advanced than we have access to in our own world, which was another kind of aspect of that world that I was showing that Hector saves his dad, right? They haven't lost their technology. That Hector,
yes, definitely.
Hector is from a sort of subculture that's renounced civilization, essentially. You know, it's kind of implied that this was their reaction to all of the crises that were unfolding, right? When you see people doing that already kind of now, we need to return to tradition and such, right? And you know, his subculture has gone so far that they've abandoned literacy, and they ban each other from talking to AIs and things like that. But you know, there's obviously still a very technologically sophisticated sort of cyberpunk society that sort of exists, like layered on top of that sort of tribal nomadic society that inhabits the ruins.
Yeah, like that's the I think in the ecotechnic society, I think John Michael Greer, he does talk about the phases: abundance industrialism, scarcity industrialism, and then the scavenger society. But even in the case of the scavenger society, you are going to have technology, right? It's just that people are going to have rules for interacting with the technology, right? And I actually love that because the tribe are like, well,
that's very Warhammer 40K. It's very Warhammer 40K, right? Where like you have like the dark age of technology, when humanity first starts exploring the universe, and then by the time of the Empire of Man, they still have the advanced technology, but no one really knows how it works anymore. It's all sort of magical to them, and you know, you have like techno-priests who you know, give it invocations to artificial intelligence spirits of the machine in order to get them to work. But they have no idea, you know, basically like, you know, just reciting command line prompts without any idea of what any of it actually means, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's already happening right now. Like most of technological society, you've got people who don't know how it actually works, right? Like if you told someone that, listen, the internet that you're on, there's a bunch of these server rooms, right, in Europe, in America, and these other places. And every day, like when we had JMG on, he was talking about this. Like every day, you need to like fry through an entire busload of like electronics, right? And you know, people get shocked by that, but you try to explain this to them. You're like, you know, technological society, you need a lot of energy, you need a lot of this other stuff. But if you actually just like, you know, snap off your fingers, suddenly these people don't show up to work, or something else happens, or something minor, it can affect a lot of people, right? Like even something small, like, you know, in North Carolina, they had Hurricane Helene, right? And it hit one of the largest factories nationwide, who creates like IVF drips, right? IVF drips are the things you have in hospitals, right? And you kind of like, you know, you attach that to people or what have you for like nutrition and whatnot. But they're now having a shortage of that stuff. And for the most part, people don't really have an alternative. They're like, okay, well, I guess we have to import it now from outside, right? Because that was really our one good plant. So you're going to see this more and more. Some of it, obviously, natural disasters. Some of it is going to be, you know, politicians doing it. Some of it is going to be warbands and warlords doing it. But you're going to see it more and more. There's a lot of failure points. And one of the things about your short story is that there's drone warfare. There's all this other stuff. But I think it's implied as you kind of read through it that society, like you were saying, good sir, it didn't fall apart for one specific reason. There were multiple failure points, and it just kind of like checked all the boxes one by one over time.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say that in that world that society has completely fallen apart, you know. You know, there are still power structures. There's still, you know, they've got this kind of advanced internet economy based upon you know, trading experiences back and forth in order to gain attention, and they can turn that attention into actual, like, trade it for actual, like, you know, real world services and goods and such. So it's still but the population
it's still functional.
It's still very functional. Yeah, exactly. But it's just that the species has gone through a massive population bottleneck. and what has come out on the other side of that. I mean, the population is much smaller due to that bottleneck, but but it's probably a lot stronger as well in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Although it obviously, in many cases too, they're not really human anymore. I mean, like once you start getting into like cyborgization and biotechnology and stuff, it's like, okay, at a certain point, like, are these even humans?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like society falling apart, yeah, I'm not one of those people who believes that society is going to fall apart. I mean, there's all kinds of people. I mean, we have Sir Cleveland Blakemore on here every now and then. He's one of our regular guests, and he'll be up in a mine shaft somewhere. He'll be up in the boonies somewhere. He'll be fine, right? But there's going to be people who are not going to make it, right?
Definitely.
In terms of how.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like in terms of what they do, like maybe they think technology will save them, maybe they think something else will save them, but overall, like, New York, LA, I'm sorry folks, but if you're living there and you work in media or whatever, like, there's no polite way to say this, but you just have a useless job and you don't have the skills to survive. Like, I'm sorry. That's kind of how it is. It's very harsh.
Humans,
that's kind of
humans can be quite remarkably resilient, and
that's true. That's true.
And the same is true of human societies. I mean, you look at something like Detroit.
Yes.
Detroit has, like, arguably has already suffered collapse. Compared to what Detroit was in like 1950, but it's still there. You still have several 100,000 people living there, scratching out some kind of existence. In fact, parts of the city are being recolonized. People kind of going in there and like settling the abandoned neighborhoods because the real estate is like ridiculously cheap. And I think if you look at most cases of civilizational collapse through history, society will typically reconstitute itself according to some kind of stable model very quickly.
Yeah.
The Roman Empire was replaced by feudalism in the Western Roman Empire was replaced by feudalism. Almost immediately. And ironically, the standard of living I've read this, seems incredible, but supposedly the lifting of the tax burden by the Roman cities when they were abandoned, or the peasants abandoned them for their new barbarian warlords, right?
Yes.
They were actually more prosperous now than they'd been before.
I believe that.
Civilization having quote unquote collapsed.
By the end of every empire, the empire is a net drain on society. I mean, one of the great attractions of the early to mid-period Roman Empire was you got the Pax Romana. I mean, I would compare that to the Pax Americana that's let us build global trade routes from 1946 to present. But after a while, I mean, we're seeing it in America already. What happened is just simply Rome could no longer defend the West from the Western barbarians. It could no longer keep them in control. I mean, I think we're definitely seeing this right now. I mean, one of the reasons America, in my opinion, is fighting so hard, part of America seems to think, part of American government seems to think that we're going to kickstart our kind of doldrums out of our economy by getting into a World War III. I think the sane part of America realizes World War III ends with a humiliating American defeat. But that happened with Russia. That happened with the Roman Empire. We're going to, like Adrianople, we've got all our legions here. We're going to take care of those Vandals once and for all. Oops.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of Detroit, Sir John brought up Detroit. Yeah, the city peaked like 1.8 million, 2 million in the 1950s. And since then, it's been going down. Like now it's at 600,000, right? So, and it's still going down. But in terms of like the standard of living going up, for a while, what happens is, like Sir Kenaz was saying, at the end of every empire, you've got tax burden, you've got all these other things. Like the reason the people join the barbarian men is not because, they have better etiquette and manners than the tax collector. No, it's because they actually have honor and courage, and this fucking tax collector is just an asshole, and I just want him out of my life, right? So I can get along with this guy who just showed up in a pickup truck with his posse of boys and their motorbikes, right? They're much better overall than this other guy who lives, I don't know, in this foreign, faraway place called Washington, D.C., who I have no ties with. And that's basically what's going to happen, right? Like, society falling apart is more like in the relative sense. Like, there's going to be people who survive, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
But
So I
in
mean,
the
like
absolute sense,
you get
yeah, go
political
ahead, go ahead.
fragmentation, and that's usually
In
accompanied
political fact,
by
yeah.
When you
that's usually
look at
accompanied
Detroit,
by warfare, civil disturbance. There's a lot of violence that comes with that, right?
yeah,
And I believe Europe's population did decrease due to the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, because it did become a much more violent place, actually.
yeah,
Yeah. But on the other side, we lost, like, if you look at it like technologically, right? We lost maybe some very high end like luxury technologies. We forgot how to, and some things like we forgot how to make Roman concrete, for example. We only recently figured out how they did that. But the really core, really key technologies, like things like it wasn't forgotten how to smelt iron, for example. And similarly with like the Bronze Age collapse, when which I think is arguably a more comparable situation to what we might be facing ourselves, because the Bronze Age,
Gotcha.
In the case of the Bronze Age, you had it wasn't one large empire; it was a sort of a number of small empires knit together into this international trade network that they all depended upon, because bronze requires tin and copper, which are found in different parts of the world. But okay, so like they collapsed, but they didn't forget how to smelt bronze, right? Like the key technologies were remembered. We didn't revert back to like the Stone Age.
I think it depends on, you're correct, but it depends on scale, right? Like in any disaster scenario, right? Like in the movies, you see this, and the movies, I criticize the movies all the time, but like what they do get right is there's going to be that one old guy or that one dude who remembers how to do it, right? But you got to scale it back up, right? So yeah, it wasn't lost, quote unquote, in the absolute sense, but centuries, decades and centuries later, you actually get back to scale, right? Like similarly, like the Bronze Age collapse, you're talking about it, Sir John. Yeah, absolutely. Like, did we technically forget how to build the pyramids? Well, no, there were people who sort of kind of knew, right? That, okay, well, 2600 BC, these things were made. Here's how they were made, right? But the scale of that was lost.
But we certainly, but we certainly didn't forget how to build it of stone. Like the key things are remembered. Similarly, I think like the key technological advances in the 20th century would be like electricity, radio, telecommunications, computers, powered flight of various kinds, whether lighter than air, heavier than air, fixed wing, rotary wing, internal combustion engines, powered vehicles, right? And we might, if we did go through some kind of real collapse scenario, I'm sure like the sort of more sophisticated versions of those technologies would be lost. But I don't think the core technologies would be lost. Those would persist into the next historical age, and almost certainly be built upon by whatever successor civilization came out the other end after things kind of stabilized and started to grow again, which has been part of the pattern, right? So even in the almost like maximally pessimistic version where we do end up in a violent dark age this century before the century's out, I would sort of suspect that you come back a few centuries later and we're sending rockets into space again. We're landing on the moon. We're landing on Mars. Like there's certain things.
I'm more pessimistic. I'm more pessimistic than that.
Because you think we're going to run out of oil.
It's a bit more nuanced than that, but like the thing with technology is that ultimately it serves people. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, for example, the Romans, right, or the Chinese or whatever, right, their inventors came up with stuff which, after they came up with it, they're like, we don't really need this, right? Like the Romans, for example, came up with batteries. The Chinese, for example, came up with gunpowder, and so on and so forth, right? There's all kinds of these things, right? But
The
people kind
Chinese
of
did. Hold on.
go for it,
I
go
got to
for it.
correct you. I got to correct you on something there. The
Tang
Chinese did
Dynasty,
not.
if we're kind,
They did
if we're talking
not
about
come
it.
up with. They did not come up with gunpowder. The word gunpowder implies something that they did not come up with. They came up with firecrackers. Like it somehow never occurred to the Chinese. Like, hey, we could use this to kill people. I think they had like some primitive grenades, but like they never like actual firearms was
So they
not
were
something
called
that they.
stoneware. So the Japanese came up with that, right? So the
So there
technology.
you go. There you
So
go.
what happened?
It
So
wasn't
what
even the
happened?
Chinese.
Okay. So no. So what? So here's the trajectory, right? 9th century AD, Tang Dynasty, right? 808 Common Era or whatever, right? And the Taoist text has this formula for saltpeter and sulfur, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of what that was for, yeah, it was primarily civilian use. Excuse me, right?
Pretty
The
lights, pretty
Japanese,
lights in the sky. That was the only application they could
yeah.
think of. Yeah.
No. The reason they didn't think about other stuff is because they had other priorities in life. Like that's the thing. It's like the Japanese had different priorities in life, right?
Correct. So
in the
exactly.
case of
So actually, and to go to your other point with the Romans and the way that they didn't follow up on some of their technological developments. Arguably one of the reasons for that is that they had this kind of like master morality. I saw Uber Boyo kind of talking to this on Twitter the other day. I thought he made a pretty good point actually. He's like, the Romans, like they were just like, well, what do we need a steam engine for? We've got a bunch of slaves. Like that was their whole thing. And they sort of prized domination more than anything. And then he goes on there to point out that like after the slave morality of Christianity set in Europe, slavery was no longer really an option. Like you couldn't enslave other Christians, and Europeans were surrounded by other Christians, so they couldn't really use slaves, which then created a market demand for industrial machinery, right? And then it is precisely during the Christian era that you start to see things like water mills and windmills being developed in the medieval age, and eventually like the steam engine and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, I mean, there's definitely like sociological.
I mean, I don't think slavery ended. I just think people changed forms. But in terms of like having slaves as a institution, I think it's still very, very alive, right? And we're in the year 2024 right now. At the end of World War III, we are going to have slaves.
Well, there's a distinction between chattel slavery and
that's true.
Indentured servants,
That's true. Yeah.
A Roman slave did not really have rights, but a serf did actually have rights, not a lot of them. But I mean, they couldn't be kicked off their land, for example. You couldn't just move them around, right? Like a Roman slave, like you just pick them up, move them to the other side of the empire, nothing they could do about it, right?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you were in Russia, you could move them around. It depends on the European place you're talking about, or it depends on the Middle Eastern place, or what have you.
That's a fair point. Yeah. And even with the discussion of slavery per se, if you look across the vast sweep of human cultures, the institution takes on such a huge variety of different forms that it almost becomes almost inappropriate to use the same word for what different cultures were doing. Like we translate them all into slave, but some of them had
it's normal human
some
behavior.
Of them had some
it's
limited right. Well, to subjugate someone else and turn them into effectively
like
a
okay. Yeah, sure. We can use the word slave. We can use indentured servant. We can use the word whatever we want. Like, I mean, the Chinese called them all kinds of things. The Chinese called them eunuchs, for example, right? So, but the thing is, muscle is always going to be needed, right? And, I don't share the same optimism you do for technology. I do think things are going to be preserved. But in terms of like the high tech stuff, right? Like people are going to have different priorities in life. And what I mean by that is, if you're not having 3 meals a day, right, and you have problems with fresh water and you have all these other things, you're going to look at life very differently, right? Your attitude to life is going to be, well, let me enslave this guy 5 blocks away or whatever, he can do all the hard work for me and I can live a nicer life, right? Like that's how a lot of people are going to think. They're not going to be thinking about higher order philosophical astronomical stuff of like, okay, let me be one with the cosmos and launch something or whatever. Like that kind of stuff, that almost theological way of looking at the world. You saw that in the 1950s, 1960s with that generation of astronomers.
But we're still seeing it now.
I mean, it
I think
depends.
if
You do see
I
it.
think if
You do
there's
see it
I
with
think if
some
there's
people.
one thing I think if there's one thing that Elon Musk has demonstrated
Mhm.
quite definitively
Oh,
over the
he's a
last
true
couple of
believer.
years.
He's a true believer.
Well,
He's a true
it's
believer.
not
I agree. I agree.
he's
Yeah.
for obviously very good reason. I mean, like look at what SpaceX has accomplished in such a short period of time. And what he's demonstrated, I think definitively, is that the stalling out of technological advancements in the aerospace industry over the last 50 years or so has not been because we've hit some kind of energy barrier or material barrier, or the technology is just too difficult to figure out, or any of these kinds of things that people talk about when or people invoke when they look at the stalling out of technological progress. It's all just regulatory. It's just too much bureaucracy, too many useless people getting in the way and preventing things from happening. Right? Even as it is right now, like the main limitation on the launch cadence for SpaceX is not the technology. It is interference from the federal government who keep, telling him like, oh no, you can't, you only have these limited little launch windows because we have to do an environmental impact statement, impact study on the effect of rocket exhaust on some species of frog or in the swamp or something like that, and like and similar, and you see the same kind of thing happening with infrastructure projects where you know we built the Hoover Dam in like 5 years, I think,
Something like that.
and
Yeah.
something, yeah, it was one of one of the most spectacular engineering projects in human history, and it went up very quickly, and not just quickly, like it was well built, like it's still there now.
Gotcha.
And then you have to contrast that, like the California's project to build like a light rail metro system connecting its larger metropoles,
Yeah, I saw that.
which
I
is
saw that.
now
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like projected for completion in like the 2050s, and some like
Yeah, it's not
absurd
happening.
cost, like hundreds of billions of dollars. And so far, they've been working on it for 20 years, and they've completed like a few kilometers of track that like so far trains haven't even run on.
Yeah.
Like it's and like why is that? Well, it's not because we forgot how to build fucking trains, and it's not because we couldn't get the material to build the stuff. It wasn't any of those things. It's like literally just regulatory bloat. And so another example would be the Concorde, right? People often like to point to the mothballing of the Concorde program as kind of like we're
Gotcha.
taking
Gotcha.
like technological step back. And
Gotcha.
like, oh, we were talking about, actually, we were talking about this in the chat.
Yes, yes, we were. We were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what actually happened with the Concorde was that the American government was like, oh, no, we're not going to allow the French to break the sound barrier with commercial aircraft over American airspace. Which then meant that the Concorde was basically just the only thing that they could use it for was shuttling people back and forth between like Paris and New York City, like, which is a pretty limited use case. And as a result of that, it was never able to turn a profit. But if
Oh,
the
there's a lot of
regulators
things. There's a
if
lot
the
of things that can be
regulators had
said.
not gotten in the way of that, like the Concorde, I'm sure would have been far more successful.
Uh, I mean that's very optimistic way of looking at it. I've looked at the numbers, and the reason I looked at the numbers was because I had this I had this discussion, not just with yourself, good sir, but like with someone else like 5, 10 years ago. But if you actually check the profitability margins, it's actually there's not much, right? I mean, you're talking about $10,000, $20,000 per ticket. you're talking about, okay, well, we need a very, very specific kind of jet fuel, which is very, very high purity, right? And oh, by the way, when we're going over the Atlantic, you've got these very, very high winds coming at us, so we burn at a much higher rate. So, okay, yeah, Paris to New York, or like New York to whatever, but we need to have a very specific route so that it doesn't burn too much, right? So
well, yeah,
there's all
well,
that
you're
kind of
obviously
stuff. Yeah.
you're obviously, with a technology like that, that's going to be catering to very wealthy passengers.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that it wasn't so popular was like, in the end, you're only saving like a few hours on the transatlantic trip. So,
Oh, it's more
well,
than that. It's more than that. It's more than that. It's also the fact that it's not just that, okay, well, it's only a few hours. Who cares about that? It's also that they're competing against something very specific, which is private jets, right?
private jets.
So
Yeah.
if I'm like a millionaire, and you tell me, hey, enough, you should have this Concorde thing, and I'm like, bro, I have a fucking private jet. Like, okay, you're telling me I'm gonna save 3 hours or whatever, but I can just be on my private jet and just take a nap for the 3 hours, right? Why the
Yeah, it's
fuck do
true.
I?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. It's like economics, right? The thing is, right? Economics is very, very important, right? Like, do I think Elon Musk?
But all that said,
Yeah, go for it.
right? So, because of the regulatory impositions, the Concorde is basically limited to flight paths, like transatlantic flight paths, and basically just one of them. If it had had much greater freedom of movement, then the time savings advantages for wealthy people to be able to access supersonic transport, between, say, Tokyo and New York City, for example, may well have been more compelling for them. Then again, all that said, once the internet matured, it could well be that, like, that itself became much less important. It's hard to say, but the regulatory aspect had a huge impact.
I mean, okay, when I hear regulatory aspect, this is a big problem traditionally with late stage empires. I would say in the case of the United States,
yes,
the GI Bill became a problem. You created a whole new class of college educated people. And when you have these college educated people, you need to find jobs for them. And so one of the best places to create jobs has consistently been government and bureaucracies. The professional managerial class, is a bunch of people who are highly educated, if of middling intelligence, who, this happened with the Habsburg dynasty. It happened in the late Roman Empire. The state apparatus just grows increasingly bloated till the state chokes on the bloat.
Well, it's also, you've got, if you have a large economic surplus, then there is a strong incentive to try and capture that surplus. And one of the ways of doing that is with like a big bureaucracy, right? The state loves to use large bureaucratic apparatuses in order to kind of extract as much wealth as possible. And from the point of view of the people sort of doing this, they don't really care that it's inefficient, that it makes society poorer overall, because it's making them a lot of money. So, what's the big deal? Like you said, eventually it does tend to grow beyond the ability of the economic base to support it, at which point you tend to get a collapse phase. And in government or governance structures will sort of what was the word that they loved to use back during all those layoffs in the 1990s? Right size itself. And, I find it very interesting, actually, that there's all this, talk between Trump and Musk of like bringing in Musk as the director of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Right? Which is, it kind of, this is sort of exactly what you would expect during a sort of collapse phase like that. It could be that the collapse phase isn't necessarily that America like descends into like civil war and politically fragments. It could be that what collapses is effectively the federal government.
The Soviet Union style collapse. Basically, sorry guys, we no longer have any money to do anything.
Right. And then what happens is all the useless stuff just gets defunded, right? You still have the core functions continue operating, but you cut all of the fat, right? And actually, I think if you do that consciously and deliberately, you can probably avoid a lot of the negative consequences that come when it happens sort of like, chaotically and involuntarily.
Well, when we had JMG on, he said the same thing. It's like, well, there is a way you can actually make life better. You basically hire Musk, you basically default on the national debt, and what happens then is you suddenly have all these manufacturing things that, once upon a time were offshored, but now because you can't trade with anyone because of your bad credit rating, you have to start getting those manufacturing shops back. Well, so that's a viable thing.
And not only that your currency is worth nothing now, and you can take advantage of that because it actually gives you an advantage on exports, right? And just to pursue that line of thought a little further, you can actually use that as an excuse to remove elements of society that maybe are not so useful anymore, right? So like it's like, okay, we have all these huge welfare programs, and this like, okay, well, we don't really need that, so that's gone now. Like, sorry, like, fend for yourselves or don't, right? But
I mean that's an interesting
one thing that I'm always harping on, right, is like how terrible the universities become. If you have this sort of like sovereign
the universities will not make
crisis,
it. The universities will not make it.
Not just that, right? But you can use that as an excuse to go after the top plums. It's like, well, we need money. So guess what? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, your endowments are ours now, right? Like, you pull a Henry VIII on them. You just confiscate their stuff. And you do it because, you got this excuse of an economic crisis, we need money really desperately. And that's part of the reason you're doing it, is like literally to loot them.
We're bankrupt. We defaulted on our debt, so we have to seize their stuff. Sorry, guys.
But you got the secondary benefit of destroying an enemy power center, right? That's so just like when Henry VIII went after the monasteries, like he was doing it for both of those reasons. Part of it was just greed. Like, he was just like, I want your stuff and I'm going to take it. But part of it was also that England was groaning under the weight of all of these monasteries that they owned, like something like half the land or something, and they were just constantly interfering politically, like completely ungovernable, just getting in the way all the time. And he was just like, okay, well, you know what? Actually, guess what? You don't exist anymore. And that was the end of that problem. And America has
it's an interesting
problem
proposal
with its academics. So I can sort of see all this inside.
I don't see the woke philosophy surviving a hard economic downturn. There are a lot of American ideas today from the professional managerial class, or something I talk about here all the time, luxury values. These are only ideas that can thrive in an environment that has enough money to listen to foolishness and actually act upon it. Lacking that, those ideas go right up. They'll double down, but nobody will listen.
It's actually not just that they're foolish. It's rather more pernicious than that. So the concept of luxury beliefs is not just that relatively well-off people who are insulated from the consequences of bad behavior can afford to believe silly things. It's more insidious and evil almost. It's like, by adopting those insane beliefs and making them high status, you sort of weaponize them, because then other low status people, seeing that these are high status ideas, will adopt them themselves, right? So and because they are not insulated from the consequences of bad decisions, they then wreck their lives.
Very good point.
which right, which then, you know, like helps to shore up the position of the elite. They're basically sort of like deliberately sabotaging um, the people under them, which is a truly reprehensible thing to do. Now, you know, I don't think individually any of them are thinking at that kind of like Machiavellian level. This is all sort of like an emergent uh, property of the system.
I'm
Gotcha.
generally skeptical about about conspiracy theories, but this one I honestly feel like I noticed the big push toward wokeness. I mean, I was in New York City throughout the 90s. Wokeness, those ideas were always there, but they were essentially held by a very small, very educated class.
Mhm.
After Occupy Wall Street,
Wall Street, yes,
suddenly
exactly,
it was, you
exactly,
could,
yeah,
like, you had fat
yeah.
phobia, you had ableism, you had, like, 157 genders, all of which were oppressed. You had like racism and
White
racism and
privilege,
racism and
and
white privilege,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
everything but talking about income inequity.
yeah.
That scared the hell out of the working classes. I mean, out of the wealthy classes, and they essentially financed, everything but questions about income inequity. A lot of those ideas, I mean, and a lot of liberals and Marxists went for it, thanks to Gramsci and his idea, we're going to have a cultural revolution because, the American proletariat is simply too wealthy to be interested in communism. Well, as the American proletariat gets increasingly impoverished, I'm thinking, you're going to start seeing more of that hard, I don't think they're going to be able to keep that monster like locked up in a box much longer. People are going to start thinking about income inequity. You're going to see more
Well,
hard communism.
no, people, they're already thinking about that, and um, I think the post-Occupy Wall Street imposition of wokeness on the West, which I think you're exactly correct about the motivations behind that, was the sort of the last great hurrah of the propaganda engines of Western liberal democracies,
Yeah, dead
as
cat bounce
expressed.
basically.
Yeah,
Dead cat
kind of,
bounce.
exactly. Yeah, like I'm. It's a pretty high bounce, to be honest. You know, like,
Well, considering the fact
but
that
the thing,
considering the fact that it's been around for a long
look
time,
at
it's
look at what
a pretty
happened.
big bounce. Yeah.
Yeah, but like look what happened. It's just a very recent example with the recent Joker movie, right?
Mhm.
Um, which just completely bombed at the box office. You know, this was a transparent attempt at, you know, sort of humiliating and demoralizing a despised part of the population. And you didn't see anyone running around wailing about it and be like, oh, I can't believe they made this. No, everyone just ignored it. They just tuned it out like it didn't happen, you know. And that I've noticed has characterized the reaction of a huge part of the uh, Western proletariat to uh, their to the regime's propaganda efforts over the last few years. It's like
Mhm.
people just they just tune it out because like after a decade of just hysterical insanity and this naked contempt, frankly, they actually destroyed the basis of trust that kind of underlay their ability to market things to people, to psychologically manipulate them. You know, it's like, you know, if you're in a relationship with like a narcissistic uh, woman, right? And she's constantly emotionally blackmailing you and gaslighting you and, you know, just being horrible. Um, for a while, it works really well uh, because, you know, you're like, oh, well, I must have done something wrong. You know, she wouldn't be saying these things or acting this way if she didn't really feel like, you know, like if she didn't really feel that or if I hadn't really made her feel that. But eventually, you know, you get to a certain point where like something snaps inside of you and you start to just hate this person. You're like, wait, no, like none of this is valid. This person's is just evil and crazy, and nothing this person says has any basis in reality. They're just trying to manipulate me, and you just tune out like everything. And then at that point, it doesn't matter how loud she screams. It doesn't matter like, you know, um, what she threatens to do to herself, or nothing
Gotcha.
matters. Nothing matters,
Gotcha.
right? Like she can say whatever she wants. She can scream as loudly as she wants, and that's kind of where they are now, And they're very hysterical. They're very loud, but everyone just tunes them out.
Yeah.
And when they bother to pay attention, they laugh at them.
Absolutely.
I noticed another date when all this misinformation worries start is about the time with Trump, 2016, 2017, and it all starts just at the time when mainstream media is starting to lose market share to social media and to independent media. All of a sudden, misinformation became the biggest problem in the world. We have to stop misinformation. Oh God, if only the First Amendment didn't stop us from doing more to stop misinformation.
That's actually that's a recent thing that they just very masked off, right? Where you got like Clinton and John Kerry and like
10 years ago
going out in public and saying like the First Amendment's a problem, we have to get rid of it.
That would have killed your political career like as much as 5 years ago. I mean, you didn't say things like that out loud. They're now at the point where they're so desperate, so panicky that they're even saying, well, God, the only way we're going to get control of this is we can't let the First Amendment stop us from like this misinformation flood that's going to end. We have to get rid of the Bill of Rights to protect democracy.
They're going to be doing a lot more stuff than that to protect democracy, quote unquote. So there you go.
Well, I mean, so yeah, when they say democracy, there has obviously been a redefinition that's happened there, right?
Yeah, it's the professional managerial collapse and the deep state and bureaucracy staying in control.
Yes.
I mean, that's very
clear. Exactly. It is the consensus of the institutions is what they mean by the word democracy. That's actually like a formal, I believe that is a formal redefinition internally that they started using like circa 8 years ago, maybe even a bit more, maybe even like 2014. Where they just kind of and like that by redefining it in their minds like that and internally in their organizations like that, they're able to then say like we're defending our democracy without technically lying, right? But this is something that like this is something that Harrison Cayley talks about on his Ponerology blog. Yes, exactly.
Another excellent one, listeners. Harrison Cayley, Ponerology. If you're on Substack, look it up, read it, subscribe to it. Postcards from Barsoom, incidentally, John Carter's thing, I recommend very highly. It's another one of my favorites. But there's some.
Thank you.
There's some great stuff. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you don't want to listen to doom, gloom, and despair all the time, go over there, folks. There you go.
The specific ponerological concept that is relevant here is conversive language, where the pathocrats, the malignant narcissists and sociopaths and so on that rise to the top of a ponerological group that is seized in control of society will begin to use language in a way that their words have double meanings, such that those who are not in the know hear one thing, which seems, maybe mundane or benign, and those who are in the know understand the real meanings of the words that are being used, which is often quite a bit darker. Like if people knew what the real meaning was, they'd be like, oh my God, like these people are evil. Hence ponerology, right? The study of evil. So I think, and I read about that concept like years ago, and I read Lobachevsky's political ponerology, and when I found out what they were doing with the R, like I kind of sensed that, like every time they said our democracy, I was like, there's something going on. This doesn't mean what it seems like it means. And then when I found out about the redefinition, I was like, oh yeah, no, that's exactly okay, right? That's what's going on. But yeah, I mean, like, they've done all this, but they've lost their ability to influence the minds of a huge part of the population. They're not going to get it back, like basically ever. They just they can try and suppress speech online using the misinformation thing, but first of all, people are just laughing at them about that.
Hard power is expensive. Hard power, when you
Yes,
try to rule by
yes,
force, hard power is expensive. Hard power breeds resentment.
hmm
Israel is finding out like what happens after 50 years of trying to control the Palestinians with hard power. In this case, within just a few years, they've so eroded the trust in mainstream media and the government that, as you said, you've got a huge chunk of American people who no longer trust the science, who no longer watch the news and say, well, Walter Cronkite says it, so it must be true. You've now got like what you have that I'm seeing is kind of like almost this Spenglerian second religiosity where you've got
Yeah.
people
There's a
who
lot
will
of
insist,
yeah.
that has to be fake news. Look at what I got here. This is a government
Yeah.
statement. This was on MSNBC.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
telling me they're lying? And of course,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
response
There's
from many people is, well, yes, of course they are.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not just the second religiosity. It's also the fact that you've got elite replacement cycles, right? You've got once upon a time the managers, the technocrats, what have you. I mean, you saw this especially with COVID, right? At the beginning of COVID, everyone's like, "Oh, trust the science. Oh, look, the doctor is saying this, so clearly they're right. Oh, they want our good." And towards the end of it, everyone's like, "I fucking hate science," right? Like doctors lie all the time, medical professionals lie all the time. They're lying to us, and so on and so forth, right? So like this thing with Musk that's happening, and I think several minutes ago we were talking about it. But yeah, like the entrepreneurial class is going to be the class of people that overcome the managerial people, right? And for
that's
a
yeah.
while
So
they'll do
you
fine,
right. So you've got this
and for a while they'll
merging.
do good. Yeah, and for
You
a
got
while
you
they'll do
yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then as with every elite, at a certain point, assuming that they are successful in replacing the current elite, they become the new elite, and they'll go through their own evolution of greatness through decadence, and they'll eventually become pernicious in their own right and need to be replaced by something in turn. Probably their ambition or their greed will get the best of them. But that's decades out. That's decades out. It's the same thing happened with the managerial class, right? Um, when they first kind of came to influence
yeah,
back
yeah,
in like the early 20th century, late 19th century, I guess, and
yeah.
early 20th century.
1930s during the
hmm
Great Depression, basically during the Great Depression.
And like to a large degree, they were actually quite a positive influence back. They rationalized systems that were a bit too irrational. Uh, they were able to enact very significant improvements to people's quality of life through public health measures and workplace safety
Hmm.
measures and public education and give the devil his due. Like the progressives of the 1920s were not the progressives that we deal with now.
Well, the
Uh,
progressives of the 1980s are not the progressives we deal with now, and you're talking about a progressive who grew up in the 80s.
mhm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
progressivism liberalism changed radically between 2011 and today. It became this kind of bourgeois affectation. I don't know what else to call it. So yeah, something like that particular period right
Gay.
after
It
the
turned in,
end.
it turned into gay race comics.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of a sudden it was like, what was like, I mean, take the classic would take a look at the "in this house we believe" sign. Science
Oh
is
yeah, that
real.
stuff.
No
hmm
human being is illegal. Love is love. Not only are they all tautologies, None of them mention poverty. None of them mention class. None of them criticize like corporate profiteering. They're all about things that will make you feel good and well. Don't you feel sorry for those poor like undocumented immigrants? I mean, you can't be a hateful person, are you? Well, they just love each other. Why shouldn't they get married? It became this very feminized, like just total appeal to sentiment. I mean, I think that culminated in the Kamala Harris campaign. I mean, what is the Kamala Harris campaign? What
Well,
is
this
her
is
position?
that feminization actually, I think, is worth pausing and thinking about, right?
Yep,
So,
yep, yep.
I had that article this week talking about the feminization of universities and looking at the phenomenon of male flight, how once
Yep.
a space or institution becomes hits a certain tipping point around 60% female, the men just abandon it. And
Absolutely.
and the aftermath of that is that it loses prestige, loses status, typically experiences a degree of resource restriction. Wages will go down in the case of occupations.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what are we seeing happen politically? At least if you focus in on the white population in the U.S., single white women are basically the only white people voting Democrat. And white men are overwhelmingly Republican. And then, okay, what are we watching happen? Oh, there's a realignment happening where all of the high status white men are all defecting to the Republican side, and the only people that are left on the Democrat side are increasingly sort of coded as kind of low status, actually. They still have control of these institutions that have kind of like a residual legacy prestige. But, these are increasingly institutions that have, in terms of like measurable real world prestige, like very, very little impact, actually. Like, people don't listen to professors anymore. They don't listen to the media anymore. They don't.
Nope.
They just tune all of this out, right? So yeah, like you're seeing basically the Democrat Party sort of collapse in prestige, collapse in status, as it becomes the party of whining and hysterical women, while at the same time, like all of the men go on to the right, which is something else that I've written about in that article on universal suffrage, where what happens when you have a democratic situation, but all of the violence capable males are on one side of the issue. Well, if they lose the vote, quote unquote, they might just look at themselves and say, what if we just ignore the vote? What'll the rest of you do?
I've been thinking that could happen. This may happen after the 2024, after November. I mean, what happens if Texas says, look, you obviously stuffed those ballots and we refuse to honor the results of this election? And then about a dozen more red states chime in. And then before you know it, all the red states are demanding a recount. What are you going to do?
There's so many ways things can go sideways, right?
Or the other way around, what if California decides they don't like the results of a Trump win and they refuse to listen to it?
Or what if the vice president, who needs to certify or ratify, I forget the exact technical term, the election in Congress on the 6th of January. Wait, who's the vice president again?
Kamala Harris.
What if she just refuses to do that? What happens then? Or I think one of the funnier possibilities I came across recently, someone suggested on Twitter, like, well, what if the red counties and swing states refuse to report their vote totals until the blue counties report theirs, so that the Democrats, don't have the information they need in terms of how many fake ballots and stuff in, right?
I wish people were that intelligent, but that's not going to happen, sadly.
The reason I think that would be really funny is the logical response from blue counties would be to refuse to report their totals until the red states report. Right? Yeah. And then you just end up in a Mexican standoff situation. You come back, months later, the election is still undecided.
Oh, we have 10,001 votes. We have 10,001 votes. You said you have 9,000. We have 10,001 votes. So we win, basically. Like this happened in Chicago. This happened in Chicago. Like Illinois with that election was complete bunk. What happened was as the results were coming in, voting stopped, the counting stopped rather. And then when it began again, yeah, Kennedy won magically, right? So
Yeah, the
this is a very
60
common tactic.
election was absolutely stolen for JFK in Illinois. The thing is, Nixon acquiesced. He didn't start a complaint because there was always an unspoken rule. We all knew that both sides tried to game and cheat the system, but we also knew that if you question the legitimacy of one election, going forward, there will constantly be people questioning the legitimacy of elections. It
which is
happened
what
in
the which is
2016
which is
with
what they're
Russiagate.
so and well, and it's why they're so enraged at Trump after the 2020 election, because
Mhm.
Trump just openly, and he never dropped it, and neither did his base. They're like, you stole this, and they were like, how dare you, because like you're supposed to like play the game, like it's like, yeah, we stole it, we fortified it, but you're supposed to just kind of pretend that was legitimate because that's how the game works.
Well, that's the
But he,
calculation. The
but he,
calculation is that the reason exactly the calculation is that, oh well, you Appalachian hillbillies and all of you, you're not gonna do anything to us because if you do, the empire collapses, right? And we're gonna get attacked by everyone else. So because
mm,
you're so patriotic, you're not gonna do anything. So sit down, shut up. The election is ours, and there's nothing you can do about it, basically.
yeah, unfortunately, the Appalachian hillbillies have to be getting something out of the empire, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
other
yeah.
than abuse, right? Which
Exactly, exactly, exactly.
they observably have not, especially in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
so
That's
yeah,
actually
I mean
going to
that's
be a very, yeah, that's going to be a very important event. Like people are like, okay, well, enough. What do you think about Helene? And I basically said, this is going to be an election defining moment. I think what you're going to see is that if you have another situation where you have the votes coming in and then, oh, magically the votes stop being counted. And then for 3 or 4 days, we don't know who the winner is. I think because of Helene, this is going to exacerbate civil unrest and civil conflict. Are we going to get civil war? I'm not entirely sure yet, but it's very, very possible. Far more likely than like the pre-Helene situation.
mm,
It
mm,
doesn't even have to go to war. Again, it just goes to like enough states decide we're not going to accept the results of this election. I mean, what are you going to do? You know, who are you going to blink, or are you going to start a civil war with a country that's like got almost the land, like is the number three law, the continental United States is the only two countries that are bigger than it are Russia and Canada.
yeah.
It's just like there's an awful lot of land there, and
And
there's
and
an
Canada and
awful lot
Canada
of
by
people with guns.
in Canada, by the way, there's some nuance there that is not
Mm,
often appreciated. So first of all, when you say Canada's bigger, it's very slightly bigger than the continental United States. It's not as
gotcha.
large. It's, when the Mercator projection makes it look like a much larger difference in the leagues. Um,
Mm.
People often forget that. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that Canada counts the permanent ice mass as part of its land mass.
Oh, okay.
And if you don't account for that, I'm pretty sure actually the U.S. has more actual land than Canada does. So,
Gotcha.
um,
Gotcha.
which I think is maybe a bit more fair, because that the ice sheets up in the Arctic Ocean, it's not like you can build on them. Like they're not
I
really
think
useful.
Forsack said that when he was on here. He's always hearing people like, well, you Canadians must just not be real enthusiastic. How come you haven't settled the North? He's like, bro, we've been here 400 years. Don't you think it ever occurred to us and we found out it wasn't worth it?
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yep.
most like the habitable land in Canada is much, much smaller than the total landmass. And it has
Yep.
been inhabited pretty densely actually for a while. I mean, there's still a bit of, you could pack more people in, I'm sure, and our government is very eagerly doing that as fast as they can.
Mm-hmm.
But notably, they're not even bothering to try to settle the unsettled regions with this subcontinental biomass they're importing, because they know it's, it's not practical, actually. First of all, they just, someone from the Punjab is not going to survive very long in in the tundra, or like a permafrost, like spruce swamp or something.
It's a band-aid over a gaping wound. It's a band-aid over a gaping wound. Like, the migration thing is them trying to make the GDP line go up. And for a while they've succeeded, but now it's just like, it's ridiculous numbers. You're talking about 400,000, 500,000, 700,000. The society's going to go kaput.
No, I'm not talking about 400,000 or 500,000. No, I wish I was.
I think it's like 800,000 or like a million a year now.
Yeah, that's more like
a million a year.
1 to 1.5, actually.
Yeah.
Like so if you count all sources, so like some sources, like some people they'll quote a lower number, which is like the number of like naturalized immigrants per year or something. With the number of new citizens. But no, I mean, if you count like the temporary foreign workers who come in, ones who come in on student visas, so all the sources, it's a lot. The number I saw recently was like something like 3 million people in Canada are temporary residents, which is getting close to 10% of Canada's population. For context, the Greater Toronto area doubled in population in the 21st century, from about 3 million to over 6 million now. Canada's population overall went from around 30 million in the 1990s up to over 40 million now.
I think it's 43 million right now.
Yeah, see, we're bringing people so fast that every time I check, I'm like, oh yeah, no, there's another couple million people in the country. Which that's the political instability in Canada is a whole other thing. I'm
looking at the official numbers. Yeah, I'm looking at the official numbers, and I don't believe these numbers. Like, the official number, right? Crude migration rate per 1,000. The official number is, oh, hang on a second. They updated it. Okay, 29. So 29 is actually very high. 29 per 1,000. So if you do the math on that, 43 million times that number, 1.2 million. Okay, so now they're being honest. So yeah, in the year 2023, they imported 1.24 million people, basically.
I think the problem with using migration to prop up GDP is it relies on two absolute unquestionable tenets of the PMC religion, which are, one of them is eternal economic growth is not only possible but desirable, and the other one is all people are blank slates, and if we put somebody in this country, give them 5 years, they'll be just as American as apple pie. And it's like, the American melting pot experience, it takes at least one generation, maybe 2 generations.
Yeah, it's and the worst thing is the fungibility of human capital is one of their key assumptions. It makes the spreadsheet calculations much easier when you assume that all of your production units are of equivalent quality. Yeah, exactly.
And the worst thing is, like 1.26, the number right now, the official fertility rate is 1.26, but they're slowly getting to, not slowly, but rapidly coming to the numbers that Albania and Bulgaria have. And like, if you know a thing or two about the fertility map for Albania, Bulgaria, and these types of people, these guys have hovered at like 1.0, 1.1 for a long time. And what's happened is they reached their peak, and now it's just rapid emigration. So everyone's leaving the country, basically.
Yeah.
Because it's like...
This is starting to quietly happen in Canada. So, I've spent a good chunk of the last year or so outside Canada. And when I was in South America,
it makes no sense. It makes no sense. Like,
particularly the number of young white guys that I met who were basically refugees from Toronto was just absurd.
All kinds of people leave. All kinds of people leave. Absolutely.
And it's predominantly sort of actual Canadians, the young, educated, high quality human capital who are just being like, fuck this, man. This, and it doesn't help that like the government, the Canadian government goes out of its way to show quite a bit of favoritism to the new imports. So that it's very difficult to maintain one's loyalty to a government that gives.
Oh, absolutely,
right.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
there's and like similar things are happening in the United Kingdom, where a lot of in Ireland, where like a lot of the young people are just saying screw this and moving. And then of course the response from the government is, oh well, then we have to import the foreigners even faster, right? So it turns into this positive feedback cycle. Similarly with the for the fertility rate. So one of the initial reasons that was given for having replacement migration was that fertility was below replacement, as it has been since like the 1970s.
Yes.
And so they're like, oh, okay, we'll make it the difference by importing people from India, Africa, Asia, or whatever. But now we actually have research that demonstrates that when you increase ethnic diversity, it actually depresses the birth rate. Probably
15% is the magic number. After you reach like 15% like non-majority and higher, the ethnic conflict increases. So there's a mass like literature.
So I think there's a few things. Stuff. I think there's a few things going on, right? So like one of them, yes, is that like if you are in a highly diverse area, then instinctively you don't feel as safe as when you're surrounded by your own people, which doesn't make you want to have kids, because you don't want to have kids in an unsafe area. Second thing is that most humans are not romantic xenophiles.
That's right.
They're romantic homophiles, right? Like they want to.
They're clannish, basically. They're clannish.
People want to. Girls want to find a guy who looks like their dad. Guys want to find someone who reminds them of their mom, which means like inside the same racial or ethnic group.
I remember noticing.
So if you're in a diverse environment, let me finish this thought. So there's a few things.
No worries.
A few aspects there I think that are actually important. So if you're in this diverse environment, you just have like a lower fraction of people who you would consider eligible.
Of course.
And then the third factor, I think, is so many people have observed that the average Western female has become much less physically attractive over the last 10, 20 years, right? Weight gain, purple hair, like all the things, right? And people are like, why is this happening? So anecdotally, I noticed at this McDonald's that I went to in Sweden for a while. I go there like once a week or two over a course of a few months. And there was this young, bubbly, blonde Swedish girl at the counter. And then, back in the kitchen, it was all like, I don't know if they were Eritreans or something, and over the course of a few months, she got kind of puffy, and then like her hair changed, dyed her hair green, she just kind of started like she's going out of her way to make herself ugly, right? And I also knew this Bosnian girl in the same area who would sort of very often she would go out of her way, like she wouldn't wear makeup, she'd wear kind of dumpy clothes, she wasn't like dyeing her hair green or anything like that.
Gotcha.
Pronouns, but like she would try to make herself look kind of unappealing. Unsuccessfully, because she was really hot. But but she did that. I asked her, like, really, and she was like, well, because like these fucking Afghans, like, sexually harass me on the street, right? So to try, she was consciously doing this in order to try and protect herself from being hassled. And I was like, man, okay, what that Swedish girl in McDonald's? Like, I bet she's doing the same thing. Like, maybe she realizes or doesn't realize it consciously that she's doing this. But then I sort of thought, like, well, hold on. we've imported like all these people from some pretty terrible parts of the world, many of
Gotcha.
whom do not exactly treat women respectfully, to say the least. And it would kind of make sense if our women started going out of their way to make themselves unappealing. But then what effect does that have on the birth rate, right? Obviously, that's going to depress the birth rate even more, because if you're ugly to the foreign guy, you're also ugly to your own guy. So now they don't want to mate with you either. You're fat and weird.
I mean, if you're ugly, you can be a concubine. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, but guys aren't going to be nearly as interested.
That's true.
And then sort of exacerbating that is the gaslighting aspect of it, because of course you're not allowed to think that immigration is a bad thing, because then you're a racist, and racists are bad people. And women are especially sensitive to being thought of as bad people.
Yeah, they're conformist.
They're conformist. So if they can't, on the one hand, like they're trying to protect themselves from being sexually harassed by brown and black guys in the street, but on the other hand, they can't admit that this is what they're doing because that would make them racist. So this drives them fucking crazy, actually. And if there's anything that a man is less interested in having sex with than a fat chick, it's a fat chick who is also insane. And thus the birth rate falls even more. And all of this could be corrected, actually, with remigration. Like suddenly those pressures wouldn't be there. Girls could be attractive again without worrying about getting sexually harassed in the streets. They wouldn't have the double think in their heads about being racist and that being bad. And the housing costs would go down, and the wages would go up, and suddenly young people would have the resources they need to start families, because that's a huge aspect of it as well.
I think you're going to see some migration starting as we see, like, once the petrodollar collapses, I've been taking as my model, okay, what happened in the decade after the Soviet Union collapsed? And you'd be looking at about a 50% decline in GDP and standard of living. A lot of people, I mean, at that point, Costa Rica has an equal living standard to the United States. Now, if I'm traveling up from South America, I can either stop in Costa Rica or I can go up, through several other hostile countries to get to the United States, a hostile country that doesn't speak my language and doesn't really have any more economic opportunities than Mexico does.
Yeah.
So you're going to start seeing that stuff.
If you're an economic migrant, exactly. Sir Kenaz, definitely. Like, if you're an economic migrant and you're like, well, America has basically collapsed, and once upon a time people told me it's an amazing place, but is it an amazing place? Let me hit up some of my homies. And then his homies tell him, yeah, things are kind of bad here and people are leaving en masse. So it's not going to be government mandated. Basically what's going to happen is people are going to leave, white, black, and brown. And the reason they're going to leave is because of social turmoil. Like, I think when we had Malcolm on, Malcolm was talking about Kazakhstan 1993 and Poland 1993, right? Kazakhstan lost about, I think the peak they got to was 16.5 million people, 1989 or something. Then the collapse happened, and they dropped all the way down to like 13 million people. So if we're doing the math on that, that's like about 20% population drop. But they stabilized. So they got to 1.8 children per woman, lowest fertility. And in 3 decades, they picked that number back up to like 3.3, right? But it didn't happen overnight, basically. They do have migration coming in, but in terms of like fertility and whatnot, yeah, it's very common for like Kazakh people to have lots of kids. And by the way, what's interesting is education level of women does not impact the fertility statistic, right? So if you're like quote unquote educated, you still have 4 kids. If you're quote unquote uneducated, you still have like 5 kids or whatever, right? But the demographic makeup of that place is fascinating because the implosion happened. The Russians who lived in Kazakhstan, they just left. And then the Kazakh and the Uzbek population increased. So now I think they make about 70, 75, 80% of the population.
So there, I think
right? So
the educating women part, like, I think it's overblown. Because people often, they'll be like, oh, the reason the birth rate's low is because women go to university, right? And
I don't believe that, by the way. Yeah, I don't
no,
believe that, by the way.
I think that's completely false.
Yeah.
You graduate university typically if you just do a bachelor's, like you're 22,
Yeah,
23.
yeah, yeah.
Like you're still right at the beginning, and you're as a woman, that's like your
Ah,
reproductive peak, actually.
but I mean, in the American corporate system, you just graduated, you're 22. Now let's say you want to get ahead in the corporate world where you're going to need an MBA, and
But
that
this
takes
is
a
not.
couple
But
of
this
years.
is.
Yeah.
But hold on, hold
What's
on.
that? Oh, this is Kazakhstan.
Kenneth, you're not. You're talking. So now you're talking economics. You're talking professional. We're not talking education. These are separate issues. And the education itself is not really what's due.
I agree.
It is.
I agree.
So yeah, the idea that women have to be out there working in the corporate sector as like an HR boss girl or something like that. Yep, that 100%, that's having an effect. Women in higher levels of professional training, becoming doctors and so on, where they're in school until they're like 30 years old. Yeah, that has an effect, absolutely. But if you look at it historically, at least in the Anglo-Saxon world, the average age of marriage for centuries, there's many, many, many centuries, going back into medieval times, was actually around 25. Because you did need to get to a certain baseline level of economic security before it was practical to have kids. You had to be able to have a house. And none of this has ever really changed, right? And people had plenty of kids. Like shit, my grandmother went to university and got out, had 4 kids, right? She didn't. She was a homemaker. She never worked aside from like part-time jobs when she was really young. And then people would sometimes, because in the 1950s and 60s, feminism started to take off. Some of her friends would say, you're not really doing anything with your education. And her response to that was that she had intelligent children who needed an intelligent, educated mom to raise them. And that was like actually the best possible use of her education, right?
Absolutely.
So, and that's always kind of stuck with me because, I also benefited from my own mother's education when I was very young, because she was very knowledgeable in a large number of subjects and could hold me absolutely entranced, telling me stories about the history of the monarchy and so on. Which, had she not had that education, she would not have been able to do.
That's true. That's true.
I think a lot of so yeah, but then if you put them in education and you use that as a vector to tell them that they shouldn't have kids because the world's overpopulated and it's burning up because of global warming, and also white people are evil, so bringing white people into the world is an act of white supremacy. Then you're probably, in that case, education will probably. That's not education. That's
propagandizing them.
That's
propagandizing them.
Somebody whose name and like the title of the thing escapes me pointed out that today the American university is much closer to what we used to call finishing schools. The basic idea is not to educate you; it's to make you a good representative of your class.
That was the librarian of Salino.
That's it. Okay, librarian of Salino, guys, another one we recommend.
Syed Naqib al-Attas, he wrote a book. The name of the book is Islam and Secularism, 1978. The second edition came out in 1993. That's the exact point he makes as well, which is that what you have in the West today, education, universities, this kind of stuff, what it is that they want to create, quote unquote, an ideal or good citizen. But for them, a good citizen or an ideal citizen means certain things, right? There's a baggage behind that, right? So finishing schools, there's that aspect, but then there's also that aspect of we're basically making a cog for the machine. That's basically what we're making.
Yes, an ideal citizen. So citizen is actually the wrong word because that implies some degree of political agency, and that's really not what's going on here. What they are actually creating are obedient workers and compliant consumers. And I think the balance of that has shifted even in my own lifetime from obedient worker was kind of maybe, that was like the John Taylor Gatto, he would talk about that, like the Prussian model of education was all about, training factory workers essentially. And then, it started becoming more about training office workers. And that's when you started having like things like, okay, everyone get in your groups, we're going to have a group project, and, remember to agree with each other and be nice to each other and all that, kind of very, like the feminized corporate culture started like leaking into the schools basically. And now I don't even think it's that. Now I think it's just like straight up like you're just trying to make them into like consumers who will, not ask questions and just consume products and wait for next products.
Funk my Funko Pops.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Precisely. And if you just look at the people who are the most successful, typically inside that system, and they are the worst bugmen. They're not terribly productive, like on the job site. But man, do they know how to consume products?
And that's the thing here is, once again, it's the luxury belief. You can have a nation of consumers, but you've got to be able to provide them with the money to consume. It's the PMC class. There was a two-headed thing going on there. One of them was, it became high status to describe, basically the in this house we believe sign. This is our mantra. If you disagree with any of these, you're a bad person. And at a time when the PMC class was just starting to really feel the economic pinch that the working classes in America have been feeling for at least 50 years, it started being, and if you don't believe all these things, we'll make you lose your job and make you unemployable in your profession. And that will hold people together, so long as you have to have both a carrot and a stick. When these people are losing jobs and not really finding them, there's no longer any reason you're going to wait. What are you going to wave? The stick, follow these beliefs.
Yeah. So
lose your
yeah,
job.
yeah.
I don't have a job, and I have no prospects for a job.
Right.
Like
and
in South Korea right
creating...
now. Yeah. Apologies, Sir John. But in South Korea right now, this is the exact effect that's happening. The exact effect, which is that the carrot and the stick, right? You have all these working professionals in South Korea. The fertility rate is like 0.8. It's like some stupidly low. I think it's the lowest in the world. And when you ask them, well, why did you leave? They give you a lot of reasons, right? But one of the reasons they tell you is that, well, look, I'm working this job, this dead-end job. I am paying these benefits and these pension things that's going to some 75-year-old grandpa. And then that 75-year-old grandpa, he comes out of retirement. He works some other job, right? So I'm subsidizing his lifestyle. I'm paying for his pension. And then he's actually fighting me and trying to take my job away, right? So, like, when you have a society of consumers, right, and then you just have a population pyramid that's top heavy, suddenly you have this, like, mass flight and emigration away from, like, that country. And that's basically what South Korea is experiencing right now. So they're like, okay, well, the 25-year-old men... Go for it.
Quickly interject. So when you said 0.8, I thought, I actually think it's even worse than that now. So I looked it up, and it is in fact worse. It's 0.72.
Oh, okay, so I'm outdated basically. Okay, there you go.
It's just and I find it really fascinating in the case of South Korea that it has I think the world's most extreme sexual political polarization.
Yes. Yes. All the women are basically vegans and vegetarians, and all the men are like reading like fascist literature. That's basically what's happening right now.
Exactly. Which I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in South Korea over the next decade or so, because that just is not a stable situation. Because
my
eventually,
guess is
it's going to fall
decade,
apart.
we're going to have Korea.
It's going to fall apart. It's going to fall
apart.
So one possibility is that the North Koreans just say they just invade, or they.
Oh, why do they have to invade? Why do they can just like?
Or they can wait for it to collapse. Another possibility is that the North Koreans sort of make overtures to the South Korean men, and they're like, "Hey, do you need help getting your women in check?" Another possibility, frankly, is that the South Korean men just pull a Sabine woman, on their own women.
That's gonna
And they
happen
just kind of
actually.
like they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's actually what I think is most likely.
That's actually
They
what's gonna
eventually
happen.
just
That's
you just
actually
have these like gangs of them who will just be like, you know what? Like, actually, no, you
new
don't get to
concubine,
have.
new neighborhood, new
Yeah,
concubine, new
you
neighborhood,
don't
new
get to
concubine.
have rights anymore. Women's suffrage is done. We're not doing any of that. Like, we are
You're my maid.
assigning
You're
you
my
you
yeah, yeah. You're my
we are
maid, and you
assigning
listen
you
to
a
me. That's basically what it
husband.
is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This happens all the time. This happens all the time. There's always a collapse into feudalism, and there's always a handful of men who get all the girls, and they're like, "Well, look, you're my maid now. You're my concubine. You do as I tell you, and all this other bullshit you believed in and you kind of did in that
And
earlier time period.
the
All of that's
girls
gone."
fantasize about this.
Oh yeah, 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 absolutely, absolutely. They write like whole like tomes of literature about like the vampire billionaire playboy like plowing them or whatever, right? They love this stuff.
I mean,
Or
50
like
Shades of Grey is, I mean, Handmaid's Tale is basically
I was
50
about to
Shades
say,
for
Handmaid's Tale is
listeners.
yeah. That's like that exactly. That's the example that comes straight to mind, where the entire thing is just like this like elaborate sexual fantasy. There's the meme with like the yes Chad talking to like the woman, and she's like, "You want to rape me?" And he's like, "What?" She's like, "You want to tie me down and have me impregnated by high status men?" He's like, what?
I remember the women dressing up in Handmaid's Tale, like it's
Yes.
because your sexual freedom in America is so threatened. People like there's never been a better time in America to be a sexually promiscuous woman than today.
Yeah, no, the Handmaid's Tale cosplaying after the Trump election, like that was just like the psychosexual subtext of that could not have been
Oh
more
my gosh.
obvious. Like,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I mean, like they're basically like sending the men all the signals that they know how to send with it. Like come on
Oh yeah.
guys, like
Oh yeah.
just like just go for it. Like and like
Yeah.
the men are so unfortunately so far so devitalized and buck broken that
I mean, you
they're
guys
not
are,
they're
but
not taking it.
we see the signals and we take them as concubines. I mean, you guys are, but
Yeah.
I think you guys will also kind of wake up pretty soon as well
Oh,
with
I think
regard to
that's already happening. So I mean, like
yeah, yeah,
one of the trends that I found very uh, heartening over the last several years has been
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
you've had a subculture, but a
Mm-hmm,
very
mm-hmm,
quickly growing subculture of young men in the West who are consciously rejecting liberalism
mm-hmm.
and egalitarianism and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But not just at like a kind of intellectual level, but like they're sort of like applying that to their own
Mm-hmm,
lives.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Meaning that they get themselves in shape, they go to the gym,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Nice,
all of these things, right? And they're sort of like
nice.
self-consciously cultivating their ability to exert dominance and make war
Yeah,
effectively.
yeah. Very
Um,
important. Very important.
yes,
Yeah,
and exactly, and like uh, I think we're starting to see the fruits of that
yeah, yeah.
now because like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
like that subculture is now large enough and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
increasingly influential enough that it's become quite visible. And the regime's sort of attempts to smear it, by saying, "Oh, you're Nazis, you're racist, you're fascists," right? And like
Thank you very
no one.
much. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
exactly. Everyone's like the subculture is like, thanks for noticing, So like it means absolutely nothing to them.
Oh man.
And that kind of class clown
Yeah.
insouciance projects confidence, which women find
Mm-hmm,
sexy,
mm-hmm.
even if they don't admit it. But they
Yeah,
always do.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that in terms of and combined with being well turned out and in shape and
Yeah.
all of these kinds of things, so like they're basically becoming high stakes. And again, like what do we see? We see the sort of tech bros realigning themselves with that movement as well. So
Mm-hmm.
not just in terms of donating money to the Trump campaigning
Yeah.
on his behalf in the case of Elon Musk, but like even sort of like adopting our memes, consciously courting our popularity amongst us on social media, adopting our talking points, all of these things. So like, I mean, that's kind of like the first stages of reconquest, which may not even, people talk about violence all the time, but like, we've never actually had a situation, as far as I know, where one side of the political divide was overwhelmingly women. Like I actually can't actually think of a case like that historically. Like whenever you have civil violence break out on a large scale, it's always two camps of violent armed men, by definition.
That's true.
Right. What happens when it's all women on one side? The men are going to be they're going to be reluctant to actually start shooting, which so far they have been, because using violence against women is kind of but at a certain point you don't even need to use
like the strategy seems to be the strategy seems to be that
sheer intimidation. A combination of like intimidation, menace, and charisma
that's one.
And charm can actually end up winning the women over in the end.
Here's a good one from my wife. Just sent me my long-suffering wife, who lets me have the living room for the podcast, just sent me a text because she had heard us talking about The Handmaid's Tale. There's an extremely popular Harry Potter fanfic where the Death Eaters take over and make Hermione a handmaid to Draco's family.
Yeah, of course. Naturally. Yeah, the Draco Malfoy is kind of like, he's like the bad boy. Or he's the gray in that series, very obviously. Yeah. So and the women readers all identify with Hermione. Like just kind of funny aside. So like that Academia is Women's Work article this week, I turned that into a Twitter thread yesterday that or a couple days ago that got a lot of play, got like 1 million views, and of course it broke out of our sphere, and the Floyds found it, right? And halfway through the thread, I had I was talking about the personality traits of the head girl archetype, and I illustrated that with Hermione Granger, and that was the one that they all focused in on, and were just like seething about, like, how dare you fucking incel, and I was just like, man, that's so typical. Like, here's this thread where like, I've actually got like a lot of data in it, like, and I'm, making, arguments and trying to explain things. And like the one part where it's like this like picture of their little heroine, and they're all like, ah, it's like, of course you're yeah, she's a hero to them. They all identify.
Yeah. I mean, the Hermione character, there's a couple of these other fictional characters as well, but like, I think, Sir John, you're onto something. The girls are not going to fight. Girls don't fight in general, right? Like, they make other people fight for them. That's their true strength, right?
And exactly. And this is, I think, to go back to the migration thing, this is why they've been importing so many like military age young males, because like, the regime being very effeminate, like it knows it does not have the ability to fight for itself, so it needs to get other guys to fight for it. But like, are they really gonna, like, are the migrants really gonna fight for them? And if they do, are they going to be that good at it? Like this,
well, even if they fight, it's not going to be for them. It's not going to be for them, and it's going to be like, and it's going to be for themselves. Precisely. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Just like, in the case of the Roman Empire, where, they brought in all these Germanic soldiers to be basically mercenaries in their legions, although I don't think they were calling them mercenaries. I think they were technically just, they're just in the legion, but they were basically mercenaries. And then next thing you know, like the Germans turn around and they're like, oh, so we have all the weapons now? I guess we're in charge. What are you going to do about it?
They went on from becoming kingmakers to like, well, why don't we just skip this whole middleman thing and like, I'm going to make me king.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So a somewhat similar thing happened with the Janissaries, I believe, in the Ottoman Empire, where, after a couple hundred years, the Janissaries were basically running things.
They had to be culled, basically. The Sultan had to cull them because they had so much influence. Because what happened was the harem right? And this is where, I mean, there's good and bad of like polygamy and concubinage, but this is the bad. Like the harem got together and they're like, if all of us just coordinate our efforts, we can just make the men do whatever we want them to. And that's basically what happened. The Janissaries were following the commands of the harem behind the back of the Sultan, and the Sultan was basically like a figurehead for a while, right? And so we had to do like a brutal purge of everyone, basically.
That's fascinating. The harem was running things. That's so
the
upside
harem
down.
was running things. So what was happening was because like
it's also just quickly. What's also funny in that whole thing is that the Janissaries were technically slaves.
Some of them were eunuchs. Yeah. Some of them were eunuchs. Some of them
they were technically slaves of the Sultan. They ended up kind of in charge. So you kind of these two groups. Harem girls were basically slaves as well, right? Sex slaves. The sex slaves and the army slaves kind of got together and they were like, so we could run this actually.
Well, the concubine, the thing with being a concubine in a harem is that you get access to a lot of info that other people don't. Like even if you're like the prime minister, even if you're like the prime minister of the Sublime Ottoman State, you're not going to get certain info, right? Now, if you're like a 17-year-old concubine in the harem and you know a couple of things about politics, you're like, I can use this piece of information I got to hold leverage over someone, right? And that's kind of where like harem intrigue and that kind of stuff happens. So no, like the Janissaries, some of them were slaves, some of them were actually recruits, but like towards the late 1600s, right? What happened was they expanded it tremendously to the point where if you had money, if you were like a adventurer or whatever, you could just join the Janissaries because like they would just pay you a shit ton of money, right? And also the same thing was happening to the harem, right? It was being expanded. Yeah, initially slaves and what have you and concubines, but then it's like, well, if you're a noble woman and if you have, some level of beauty or whatnot, yeah, I want you in my harem basically. So you had this concentration of powerful and influential and beautiful people on like both these sides, and they're like, yeah, you know what? If we coordinate our efforts, the Sultan can't do anything. And we're talking about a period of like 1.5 centuries or so, where like these guys dominated the whole thing, right? And I think in Ottoman history, this is called the stagnation period, actually. The stagnation period, because the conquest period, it lasted really till about, I guess, late 1500s, early 1600s, right? Then you had the ascension of Persia, and Persia in the late 1500s, early 1600s, they were fighting the Ottomans. Ottomans were fighting everyone else. But yeah, 1600s was stagnation, and then you had Russia that rose up after the Great Northern War, 1720 and beyond. And I think the Ottomans only beat the Russians once. That was like the Crimean War, and that was thanks to like French and British troops, right? So the Ottomans technically never beat the Russians, right? Because
beating the Russians historically, going to war with Russia is not usually the best idea. Like, they have a pretty good record, actually. Like,
And they were like Andrei Martyanov, who I like to call based Russian grandpa. He likes to remind everyone that the Russian armed forces has a history longer than the United States has been a nation, right? So when people say stuff like, "Oh, we're gonna invade Russia," they need to shut the fuck up and actually back off for a bit, right? So he's very patriotic about that kind of stuff. But no, like Russia and the Ottoman Empire.
You saw that in the famous Putin interview, right? Where like, Tucker's like, explain to us, and Putin's like, well, it all started in the 9th century.
878. And then he lectures for 20 minutes. I'm like, what is this?
That's like Tucker's like nodding away with his like confused face on like what is happening here? Like, no American politician does that. Gives an extemporaneous lecture on medieval history, like.
And this brings us to Ukraine in 20 minutes. Oh man, that was a fun interview. Yeah. That was a fun interview. But no, like Russia basically, like the Ottoman Empire after the Great Turkish War of 1683, 1699, it never really recovered. It kind of like stagnated, and then Russia and the others just finished the job, right? But like 1299 to 1699, that's really like the main lifespan. After that, you basically had what people call the sick man of Europe, like. Yeah, he's a big state, but there's not much he can do, right? Like he had a nice 400-year run, but that's really it.
Yeah, large, tired empires like that can have a tendency to kind of like limp on for a long time. Same thing happened to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. like, but
Oh yeah, those
it's just,
guys, those guys.
it's last century or so. I mean, it was, on paper, like it was just, like indomitable, like it's huge, this vast military power, but
Yeah, yeah.
the constant political deadlock because of the ridiculously complicated political system that it had,
hmm
it just, as like it was incredibly unwieldy, basically, which, like, again, this tends to happen to empires over time. It becomes very difficult to steer them because, like, you have all of these entrenched interests, and
Absolutely,
like
absolutely.
special exceptions have been built in, and overly complicated bureaucratic apparatus, and just the whole thing. Which, of course, that's where America basically finds itself
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now. Although, I've said for a long time, I people are always making the comparison of the United States
hmm
to
hmm
Rome,
hmm
justifiably so.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
but it's always like, oh well, it's the collapse phase. I'm like, is it, or is it at the late Republic stage, where the next stage after this is actually to move into a more explicitly imperial
Gotcha.
mode, where in fact its greatest days may well be ahead of it. Um,
Yeah, the Roman comparison is interesting. I see America more as Carthage. Uh, I see Russia more as
yeah,
Rome.
yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
see
yeah.
Russia. The reason I say Russia is Rome is because if you actually study Carthage and Rome, Carthage actually had larger population during the first Punic War. I think also during the second as well. But it was
Hmm.
primarily a society that was like Carthage was a society focused on commerce, on trade, money, and oh hey, we're gonna fight a war. Okay, fantastic. Let's hire a bunch of mercenaries, which is what America
Yeah,
is
so,
right now.
yeah.
It's like
Well, so
Blackwater.
yeah,
It's
and
like
like
Blackwater and all these other mercenary groups.
and
And like Russia, and Russia's
Carthage was
got basically
a mercantile sea power that engaged in child sacrifice, run by
there we
Semites.
go. There
So
we go. And like
pretty,
the
yeah,
Romans are like and the Romans are like a martial people whose attitude to life is, oh, the Carthaginians destroyed 6 of our legions. Yeah, let's just raise 6 more. We're gonna keep fighting until they lose. That's basically their attitude to life.
but that said, uh, I mean, this is so. I mean, one of the dangers of historical analogies is that you can get like locked in a little bit
Yeah, yeah,
too
yeah,
much to
yeah.
one or the other, right?
hmm
Um, Internally, America grew much more like the Roman Empire did.
Mm, mm, mm.
It did not. It sort of, America is a telerocracy which developed into a thalassocracy during uh, the 20th century. But
Interesting, interesting.
the sort of foundation of the United States is really much more as a land power. And
hmm hmm
there's that's one of the tensions within American society, is that, like, internally, um, a lot of the honor culture that America has
Gotcha,
is very
gotcha.
much like what you would expect from an imperial land power.
hmm
Um,
hmm
and then this is sort of awkwardly married to the sea power, which is dominated by, like, New York City and Washington,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Who have a fraught relationship
hmm
uh,
hmm
the yeoman warrior class, who
hmm
they rely upon historically to actually fight their wars.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so one could sort of imagine that in a multipolar scenario where
Yeah.
American sea power sort of becomes something of a thing of the past, either because it can't afford it anymore or because technological
Oh, it's happening
developments.
right now. Yeah, like
Right, right.
the ships are
So
being
then what?
decommissioned as we speak. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then what happens? Well, I think the most likely scenario is that the thalassocracy falls apart. The
Yeah.
telerocracy ends up sort of regaining its position of prominence. And there's a kind of like an internal reconquest, basically. Um, with America kind of persisting indefinitely as a sort of North American hegemon. But then, of course, there's space, which is what is going to be the thing that really matters in the 21st century, from a commercial, political, and economic perspective. First of all, there's the resources out in space.
Sir John is a true believer. Sir John is a true believer.
It's just the math works, man. First of all, like I said, you have the economic resources that are out there to be harvested. Second is just from a military standpoint, whoever holds the high grounds has a massive advantage, right? And that sort of so if you sort of envision the solar system as a series of nested spheres with each sort of orbital sphere encasing the ones inside of it, and the outer spheres having naturally it's sort of higher energy, right, than the ones inside of it. If you occupy the outermost sphere, you have a massive military advantage over everyone inside, because it's easier for you to get at them than it is vice versa, in terms of just chucking rocks at your enemy, right? So
the weaponization of space is actually the weaponization of space. If we
the other factor is who is going to get to settle all of this, right? Which I think is going to be driven by similar to the settlement of the New World, where some of it was commercial in the plantations, for example, in the South.
Gotcha.
In motivation, and but some of it was straight up ideological. The Puritan colonies in New England, they went there because they just wanted to be left alone, right? They wanted to be as far from Europe as they could, so they could set up their New Jerusalem. Similar motivations drove the migration westward, where some of them just wanted land so they could be prosperous. Others, like the Mormons, just wanted to be left alone so they could build their own society, right? So both of those are going to be at play, and I think that's going to have a very important. I was going to say geopolitical, but that's the wrong word. Astropolitical, I guess.
Sure.
Influence in the coming age. And it won't necessarily be the States that does that. I think it'll be a scramble for those resources. The Chinese and the Russians are obviously going to be.
I wish I had your level of belief, but the thing is, right? I think the moon is 250,000. That's the number, 250,000 miles. I think Mars is actually 34 or 35 million miles. That's the closest point. And I think average distance is about 225 million kilometer. Basically,
but what matters is not distance. What matters is time.
Oh, both of these things matter. If you're an engineer, for you, engineering
only time matters, actually. So if you can travel faster, then that distance is smaller, right? Because you're crossing it in much less time. The New World was 6 weeks. Crossing, right, from Europe.
That's true.
So Mars right now I think is 3 to 6 months, depending.
If we assume
that's longer than 6 weeks. That's longer than 6 weeks. It is not longer than many of the voyages that they would take back in the age of exploration, though. The moon.
Well, we're forgetting. We're forgetting.
Moon is only 3 days away.
Yeah, moon is 3 days away. Exactly. If we assume that the distance is that much, 35 million, then that's a 4 or 5 month trip. Maybe you can half that to, I don't know, 2 months or whatever. But here's the thing, right? you need to remember that as you're going towards Mars, the radiation is going to be pelting you, right, from everywhere, right? So yeah, one or two guys might get there, and everyone else on the crew dies of like radiation poisoning or whatever.
No, this is one of those very silly objections that gets raised.
Oh, go on ahead.
It's people like will discover this. Oh my God, there's radiation on Mars. There's radiation in space. Oh, that kills it. There's no way people can survive. And it's like, okay, yeah. Like, do you think the engineers haven't thought that one through? Like, yeah, okay. So, like, okay, what do you do about the hard radiation? Well, you put about a meter of water between you and space, and the radiation can't get to you anymore. Like, it's not a high tech solution. That's just like one example of things you can do.
It's not a high-tech solution, but you have to maintain all the engineering stuff. So yeah, you put a meter of water all around you, but now the spaceship still has to get there in 5 months, right? So you've added a new variable. I mean, I don't see it happening because again, it's not just the radiation, it's not just distance, it's not just time.
It's all been worked out. That's all been worked out. It's all been worked out. They know it's all solved.
The thing is, there's a reason we've not been, America got to the moon in 1969, and it got there
the reason we haven't been back is that the boomers lost their, they wanted their cummies, and they felt they had like a big, they're all collectively having a big sad about the plight of the poor African American. During the Apollo launches, there were these big protests. By predominantly African Americans. You can find the pictures of these all over the place. Billions for space, pennies for the poor, like a sign held that it's like black welfare money. Or the famous poem like "Whitey on the Moon," where this black poet is like complaining that he can't pay his rent.
I don't think Shaniqua. So, like, I don't think Shaniqua. So what happened? Been back to the moon. Yeah.
No, Shaniqua 100%. Because what happened? What happened was that Nixon basically. So like at the beginning of the 1970s, there were no plans to cancel the Apollo. The existing space program, the plan, as put in place by Wernher von Braun, who had developed this whole thing.
Yes.
They were working on a nuclear thermal propulsion rocket called Nerva, which would have been able to do a 3-month trip to Mars. They were the original idea with the space shuttle was to be a fully reusable sort of like tug kind of like transport, just to get things up into orbit, where they would build the larger stuff to they're going to have a permanent manned base on the moon, like all these things, right? Of course, this stuff is going to cost money. And they've got the Vietnam War going on at the time. And then they've got, because of the civil rights movement and everything after that, they've got all these people kind of clamoring for their piece of the pie. So in order to sort of, basically NASA's budget got dramatically slashed, because as far as the American political class was concerned, they'd already gotten the political capital they needed. Apollo by landing a guy on the moon, had a big spectacle, made the Russians look bad. Great. Okay. We don't care about the rest of this stuff anymore. What we care about is making sure we get votes in our electoral districts, right? So Wernher von Braun got sort of like he got kicked out of NASA, essentially. Motivated to step down, I guess. Like once he realized that it wasn't going to happen, the funding wasn't going to be there anymore. He was like, well, there's no reason to be here. And they put a bureaucrat in charge who was not the visionary that von Braun was. So after that, NASA descends into very safe bureaucratization. The budget is, like I said, dramatically smaller. So they start focusing on, unmanned missions and stuff like that. Because we'll just do some science.
Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson brings this up. It's like, well, look, an unmanned mission can get you the samples, it can get you all this stuff, but if you send someone up there and he just dies or whatever as the thing's being launched, that's a
Yeah,
big
so this
liability.
this is the kind of small-souled bureaucrat brain lack of spirit and imagination that afflicts the American professional managerial class right now, where like it's like, okay, yes, there is a risk to sending a human being somewhere. However,
Sure.
the human being can do a lot more than the robot can. If you look, for instance, at like a Mars rover.
I mean, it depends. Like robots can do certain
No.
things that we can't, and we can do certain things they can't.
Sure. But if you look at if you look at the speed that a Mars rover is moving at, it's like inching across the landscape because it's got this like little 10-watt fucking power source. Like they're very
well. That's by design,
so,
because they don't want. Yeah, like the 10-watt design is because of the fact that Mars has -55 and positive temperatures of like what 130 or something, right? So they're like, okay, well, if we make the battery
there's design limitations by that. I don't disagree. Like that's the best they can do for an unmanned rover. Absolutely. The point being that you get a human astronaut in the same environment wearing a spacesuit. He can cover a lot more ground a lot faster. He can improvise a lot more than the robot can. He can do a lot more. So the rate at which you can explore increases dramatically once you have humans on site. Now, the risk is higher. Yes, they might die 100%. But the fact that there is that risk gives it glory, right? Like just the psychology of young men going and doing dangerous things, kind of specifically because they're dangerous. Like, yeah, you might die, but if you don't, and you succeed, then you're a hero, right? Like no one sitting in mission control is anyone's fucking hero, But like bureaucrats don't think this way. They just think like, oh God, like if someone dies, bad PR, I lose my job, right? Like personally, I sort of suspect that like, if we had like a larger space program that was maybe a little bit more willing to like risk to not to risk men's lives, but to let men risk their lives.
Gotcha.
I think you'd have a lot of guys signing up for that. Just because the glory.
There are true believers. Yeah, there are true believers who would definitely sign up. There are true believers who will definitely sign up. Like, I've always looked at energy. It's one of my, I guess you could call me a hobbyist at this, but the average American who lived in the late 60s and 70s, like the grandparents of this generation, like, and the great grandparents, they lived much more prosperous lives in the sense that they had much more access to primary energy, right? There's not that same access anymore, right? I think the number I last checked was 1973. The average American had 98,000 kilowatt hours per year to work around with, right? Nowadays, I think 2023, the number was like 77,000. And it's been decreasing like that. Like it's stagnated and it's decreasing. Anyhow, the reason I bring it up is because, look, there's true believers out there. Like, one day we're going to go to space, right? But in a less energy-rich environment, you're not going to make it, right? Because, people will
But again, let's get back to what we were talking about at the beginning.
Go for it.
About regulatory
gotcha.
Imposition kind of like getting in the way of things. Why did we have access to more energy back then? Well, since then, there has been a total refusal to build new nuclear reactors or, using old designs, using new designs, so there's been this kind of stalling out in our energy generation technology just because the government's like standing there and like a lot of like NIMBYism as well from the population being like, oh God, nuclear is scary. You've had, I think, the bureaucratization of science has an effect.
Sure.
You've got like the fusion research happening in ITER. Like people always say, okay, well, fusion's been 20 years away for 50 years, and
that's right.
We keep hearing that they hit the break-even point, and then 10 years later they're like, hey, we hit the break-even point. Like, didn't you guys already do that? So like, what's happening there? I don't know enough. to say, but I do kind of wonder if
The
this
thing
is a
is, right?
case of if this is a case
Yeah.
of a lot of sort of bureaucrats embedded in a what is nominally a scientific research organization who don't really care about making breakthroughs. And
Okay,
I also
so
wonder
yeah. Go for
if
it, go
something
for
like
it.
that is because it sucks up a huge amount of resources,
Yeah.
not just monetarily, but like in human capital as well. That other other technologies that might end up being more effective
Gotcha.
don't get explored. There's
Gotcha.
a historical analogy with powered flight, actually, where
Gotcha.
in the 19th century there was this large, expensive, government-funded research project to try and develop heavier than air aircraft, working through like Princeton University and such, and like a whole bunch of guys working on it, big names in the field, lots of letters after their names, and they're all putting up these papers like, oh, maybe another 20 years, like based on current rates of progress, right? And then next thing you know, like these two fucking bicycle mechanics working out
Yeah.
of their garage in the middle of
Yes,
butt fuck
yes.
nowhere, right? Like right? So
Yep.
you never know
Yep.
when something like that's going to happen, but it's quite possible that the
Sure.
massive bureaucratization of science has kind of impeded
Sure.
that. So
Sure. Like I
again,
have
you have
to.
all of these
Yeah.
regulatory and sociological factors that are kind of
Sure.
yeah.
I don't dismiss that. I don't dismiss that. Like my attitude to the thing is like, and I Trio Pater, I always message him back and forth on Telegram. But like what I tell him is, look, do I have a deductively sound logical argument which is like close-ended and shows you definitively, okay, interstellar migration, artificial general intelligence, and fusion power, these things are not doable. No, I don't have that argument. What I can do is I can show you inductively that over the past decades, the stagnation and the decline, the trends are like this. And so if we project that, we don't get the outcome you're talking about, right? I mean, in terms of like aired flight, I think Sir Kenaz on this podcast, he said
the thing is you got to be really careful. You got to be really careful making those kinds of arguments. So you could look at it.
Sure.
If we apply the same argument to the exploration of the oceans over the course of the last 2,000 years, right?
Gotcha.
Right? Like you would see like, oh, here are the Scandinavians like getting all the way to North America, Finland, right? And oh geez, and look at that. Like they failed in Finland and then they died out in Greenland and like, yeah, okay, well, clearly ocean exploration's hit its peak. You could apply the same argument to the Chinese treasure fleet in the 15th century.
Gotcha.
Which is actually, and so, in the case of the Vikings, you could argue that like, their population was too small to pull it off. They didn't have the right resource base, there wasn't enough, there wasn't enough alpha in it for them,
Gotcha.
They were too outnumbered by there's all sorts of things to point to. They didn't have enough of the technological advantage over the Skraelings to,
Gotcha.
gunpowder hadn't been invented yet, or it had been in China, but they didn't have it themselves. In the case of the Chinese, like that's a clear-cut example of basically the regulatory problem, right? Where like the technology worked fine. They got, I think, all the way to the Cape of Good Hope.
Okay.
Right, like all right down to the Horn of Africa. They never had the imagination to just sail out into the Pacific.
Gotcha.
Right, which is why they never found North America. Although even if they had, politically, they probably wouldn't have done anything with it because, like, when they found Africa, they were like, a bunch of savages. We can't do anything with this. They would have reacted the same in North America, most likely.
Gotcha.
But then, like the Chinese emperor, a new emperor comes in. He's like, well, this is a big waste of money. I'm shutting this down and burning all the ships and killing everyone who worked on the ships and killing everyone who built the ships and killing everyone who designed the ships and destroying all the records of all the blueprints that we used to make the ships.
I mean, this happens a lot.
No one could ever do this again, right?
Yeah. I mean, this happens a lot in human history. But
I think the Chinese, I think the reason the Chinese are so are being so deliberate about their own space program is like they're keenly aware that they turned their back on the ocean, or turned their backs on the oceans 500 years ago. And then they woke up one day to find European gunboats sailing up the Yellow River.
Gotcha.
Right? Like they got made Europe's bitch for like 100 years. And they're like, okay, well,
yeah,
we
century
don't
of
want the same
humiliation.
thing. Exactly.
Century of humiliation.
So, you know, what happens to the society that turns its back on space? Well, 200 years later, like you've got people living
The
up
thing
there
is, right,
who
like
drop rocks on your head.
yeah. I don't think people turned their backs on space. I think what it is that they tried and they failed, and people showed them the math, and they're like, yeah, the math doesn't work. Like The Economist, right? The Economist wrote that paper, 2011, the end of the space age, right? And they were talking about, okay, well, look, there's rich people like Musk and these other people.
Do they ever look stupid?
I mean, I think they're correct, but like, I think they're correct, but like the
no,
point
but the economics. The economics.
The point in the paper they were making, the point in the paper they were making was that people like Musk and these other guys, yeah, they're gonna send stuff into low orbit. There's like a market for satellites and that kind of stuff, but the original stuff, the pioneers, they're like, okay, well, we're gonna mine asteroids and then we're gonna build the moon base. Like when they got to the moon and they did the soil samples, they're like, okay, there's some stuff here, but like most of the stuff is probably deep underground because there's lack of plate tectonic activity, right? I mean, yeah, we promised people iridium and all this other like cool stuff we didn't find, and now we have to persuade them economically. Like the thing with economics is that
the iridium is mostly in the asteroids. But so the economics of resource extraction in space depend on very sensitively on cost to orbit, right? And economists, I don't know. They don't. A lot of them don't seem very good at taking into account.
Sure. I'm not talking about them.
Political changes.
I'm not talking about those guys. I'm not talking about those types of economists. I'm talking about like basic understanding of like, okay, well, if we send this expedition here, or if we do this, right, do we get like a market out of it, right? So if you're like a guy and you're trying to explain to someone, okay, listen, we want to send this thing up in space in the moon, right? And by the way, this is how much it's going to cost. I mean, SpaceX, for example, even though they run a pretty decent gig with regard to sending satellites up there, I think their net numbers is like $4.5 billion of revenue, but the net account is actually negative. It's like negative 600 million or something, right? So unless you have government subsidy and the state show up and constantly bankroll you, it's not going to work out, right? And that's the problem with space in general. The problem with space in general is, as a science project, it's nice, but as something, okay, well, we as a society, we are going to go balls to the walls and just implement this like 1000%. That's a very hard selling point. Like most people nowadays,
Ahnaf, but you're kind of gliding over there.
Please enlighten me. Please enlighten me.
Well, I mean, I already said it. You just trampled right over it like I didn't say it. Is that all of this depends with extreme sensitivity on the cost to orbit, right?
Right.
Well, okay, so I actually haven't looked at this, but let's say you're correct that SpaceX is currently operating at a $600 million per year deficit.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible. They're doing a hell of a lot of R&D.
Those are their official numbers. Numbers. Yeah.
They've now effectively demonstrated full reusability of a launch platform.
Okay.
That was pretty impressive as well.
That's an impressive thing. Yeah, sure.
They already had the full reusability, right? They'd landed the booster rocket multiple times before, so that had already been done. The Mechazilla thing with this added is that like now they don't have to go out, pick up the booster, transport it all the way back to the launch pad. Now it's right there on the launch. It's right there on the launch pad, already hooked in to the launch tower. Just needs to be refueled. Pop another payload on top of it, and up we go again. Right, which means that your cadence now increases dramatically. Your capital cost per launch is effectively the fuel and nothing else. Right. So most of the cost of getting to orbit has been the fact that you throw most of the rocket away with every launch. And even the space shuttle, like, the booster rockets and the fuel tank were just discarded, right? So every launch was stupendously expensive. The space launch system that NASA was building with Boeing, I guess still technically is, but like I don't ever think they're gonna. That was basically just a glorified, like a scaled up version of Saturn V. The whole it like very old design, like just multi-stage rocket, discard everything, right? Starship has made that completely obsolete.
Okay.
And it's a complete game changer. Because now you can get stuff up to orbit like 1,000% cheaper than you could before, right?
It's an interesting. Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about. You're talking about the thing that held the thing after it launched.
The Mechazilla.
Gotcha.
Yes. Yeah. That's why everyone was freaking out about this. I mean, it was a stupendous technical feat that they demonstrated. But
I remember
it's a huge step forward. And then like stepping aside from SpaceX and rocket technology, of course, which there's always room to improve that with better fuel, more efficient engines, what have you, that you can bring the cost to orbit down even more potentially. You've also got advances in material technology, which are being made, which may well this century make it possible to build a space elevator. If you have a space elevator, I mean, forget about launch costs. Getting to orbit is now like something like it goes from like now it's like $100,000 a pound or something, like with existing launch systems.
Something like that.
SpaceX potentially bring a fully reusable Starship potentially brings that down to on the order of hundreds of dollars a pound or less, actually. Like less than that. A space elevator brings that down to the order of dollars per pound. Such that a round trip to orbit is sort of like a middle class family could afford to go up to orbit for like the weekend for like a fun vacation. Like it becomes a very routine thing.
I mean, people said that. Yeah, I mean, people said that in the 1960s. Like, this is not a old concept. The space elevator concept, which is like, how do we colonize?
The space elevator's been around for a long time. What's changed is that the material science is getting to the point where we can start envisioning building one of these. So like, whether that will succeed or not, who knows? But there's one thing that, if I look at the broad sweep of human development, I think I can say with reasonable confidence about our species' superpower is that we have an ability to visualize capabilities and then gradually make those capabilities real, right? And like when we first start visualizing them, we often, when people first started dreaming about flying in the sky with the birds, which probably goes back to the dawn of our species, we had no idea whatsoever about how we would go about doing that, but we eventually did get there. Right? Like I'm fairly confident that all of these speculative engineering projects that have been thought of, going back in the case of space travel to Tsiolkovsky in the 19th century, who came up with all the fundamental ideas like multi-stage rockets and airlocks and rotating space habitats. A lot of these, we haven't even built that one yet, but I don't think anyone doubts that it's possible to build, right? It's just a matter of sort of getting around to doing it. And that stuff, a lot of that stuff did happen though, like has already happened. It's in the early stages. Once it's cheap enough to get into space, it starts becoming exponentially easier to do things out in the solar system. And once you can start harvesting resources in the solar system, it gets even easier because now you can just build things in situ. You don't even have to loft them out into space. The economic case, I agree. I actually do agree with you that the economic case for a lot of it is tricky to make. Like I've yet to come across a good economic argument for Mars, for example. But that's why I sort of then I look back at like the Puritans, right? So
Gotcha.
What it looks to me like Musk is kind of planning on doing is developing the capability to get humans to Mars for, I don't know what it'll come down. Maybe it'll be like, say it's like $1 million, right?
Gotcha.
For like a one-way ticket.
Well, you know what he can do? You know what he can do, actually? This is actually a very practical thing he can do. If he wants to make a very nice business pitch, what he can do is be like, look, guys, you don't believe in us. All you doomers like Ahnaf and Kenaz and all you other guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a domed city on Antarctica, right? And we're going to build it in a place which very, very similar, but not the same, obviously, but very, very similar to the surface on Mars. And we're going to show you that, hey, this actually is not just practical, but there's an economic element to it as well. If he can do that successfully, then I'll be the first to admit that, hey, even though I'm pretty much a doomer for life, he might be onto something if he successfully builds that dome city on Antarctica, right? But it's one of those things where I've had all these types of conversations before. There was a gentleman I had a conversation with, very intelligent guy, 2010, I think. He was making the case for hydrogen cars, right? And he was telling me, look, Ahnaf, you're a doomer. You think that, oil, coal, and natural gas, this kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. But don't worry. We got like hydrogen-powered combustible engines and all these other things coming up. And all this other stuff's going to change the world. And I basically told him that, okay, let's assume you're correct. Let's assume this is the game-changing technology. What level of activation energy and money and expertise and what have you would be required to implement all this nationwide? You're talking about something that's going to take years and decades to implement. Like the American highway system, for example, you would have to basically go through all of these gasoline stations and pumps and whatnot, and you got to change it into hydrogen. It's one of those things where, like, distance, you were talking, good sir, about distance and time. Distance and time also applies to this case as well, with regard to, okay, it's the year 2024 right now. It's October. We're basically in World War III as we speak. We're basically waiting to see how it accelerates and goes into the next phase. But we're going to be fighting this war for about a few years, probably a few decades. At the end of it, after all those casualties, do people care about space anymore? I mean, there's going to be true believers, sure, but most people will be running around the place trying to figure out a way to survive. They're not going to be thinking about hydrogen fuel. They're not going to be thinking about
happening.
Okay,
what was happening? What was happening in Europe all through the age of exploration? Constant, vicious internecine warfare. The fucking 30 years war happened in the middle of that period, I mean, like the war, Spanish succession, like
sure.
like it was, I mean, like it didn't stop them.
Sure.
So on the Antarctica thing, that gets brought up a lot. People will be like, well, why don't you just go to Antarctica because that's easier. Peter Haig, who's on Substack, he's a space science professor in the UK, right? So a Substack called Planetocracy, which is quite excellent in my opinion.
Gotcha.
So he had a good treatment of this with this question where he made some very, very good points. So so in terms of resources, right? Antarctica is buried under miles of ice. Getting to any of the minerals is actually kind of hard. Whereas digging stuff up on Mars, a lot easier. So first there's that.
I mean, you got to get there first. You got to get to Mars first.
His point is his point is obviously if you're in the spot. He wasn't talking about like the economics of mining Mars to send stuff back to Earth. He's just talking about building self-sustaining human colonies.
Fair.
In one or the other.
Okay. Gotcha.
So first of all, resources are easier to come by. Second, on the question of energy, he points out that Earth is a lot closer to the sun, but due to the latitude that Antarctica is at the
Yeah.
most, it's getting like 10% of the incident like flux that you get at the equator. So it's already really truncated. And that's the sun, right? And then half the year, there is no sunlight. So you're getting no solar energy at all. Whereas Mars, like, if you pick a spot near the equator, it's got about a 24-hour day. It's further from the Earth. It's further from the sun than the Earth is. So the maximum flux that you're going to get is much lower. But I think it's like 25%. But it's more than you can get in Antarctica. Then he points out from the point of view of just surface area. Mars has a whole lot more surface area than you would get in Antarctica. Temperature issue. I mean, Antarctica is fucking cold. Mars is
Antarctica has wind. That's the wind is going to be the real killer.
That's true. Antarctica has some nasty wind.
Well, it depends on where you are. It depends on where you are on Mars.
One thing you don't need to worry about wind at all on Mars, because the atmospheric pressure is so low that even during those like horrendous dust storms, like it can't actually do any damage to you. There isn't enough atmosphere to really meaningfully make a difference. So that's not something you need to worry about. That was something in that Andy Whale movie, novel, The Martian. This turned into a movie, The Martian. Like he sort of sheepishly admitted after writing it that, like, that initial scene where Matt Damon gets, like, there's like a big windstorm and they have to abandon the base, and Matt Damon gets like a piece of debris that gets like jammed into his leg or something. It almost kills him. He's like, yeah, actually that wouldn't happen because, the wind on Mars, like, you get the wind speeds go up very high, but the density is so low that it doesn't do anything to you. So that's, not something you really need to worry about. That said, a big dust storm blocks out the sun, so there goes your solar power. In terms of the temperature, it gets very, very cold on Mars. Although during the day in the summer, I think it gets above zero. I could be wrong, but it gets, not that bad. But dealing with, like, minus 100 and minus 60 in Antarctica is kind of comparable. Actually, it's like the answer is kind of the same in either case. It's like stay inside.
Yeah, that's the point. Exactly.
Stay inside the well-insulated area, or if you go outside, make sure.
Like, Antarctica is not. Yeah, the reason I bring up Antarctica is that Antarctica is not an exact clone of Mars. That's not the point. The point is that Antarctica is a very, very inhospitable place where nothing grows and what have you. So in that sense, it's similar enough, right? Obviously, Mars.
But this is actually this is where the sunlight thing actually comes in. It's rather important, right? So, like, okay, can you do agriculture in Antarctica? With great difficulty, because you don't have any sunlight for half the year. Right? Like, I mean, forget about the temperature, like we're talking about greenhouse agriculture, obviously.
Gotcha.
Right? But basically the only way to do it in Antarctica would be hydroponics.
Yeah.
Right. So Mars, well, you have a day-night cycle, but 24 hours long. You're getting about 25% the incident flux that you get. So, we don't know for sure, but, well, I mean, actually, I think we actually know. I think there's reasonable grounds to suspect that we would be able to grow things in a greenhouse on Mars in which, the temperature and air pressure and such were kept at nominal conditions, using effectively just like, the sun, which is more than you can't do that in Antarctica. So, that's sort of,
in general, solar power.
I don't know for sure if that's true. Okay. Like, I don't know for certain, but, like, just given that, like, there's so many plants that grow in relatively low light conditions. I'm sure something in the middle of a shrub growing on the forest floor in the middle of like an old growth rainforest in the Pacific Northwest is probably not getting a lot of direct sunlight. Right? Like, is it 25? Is it Martian levels of sunlight? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised,
Gotcha.
So, like, There's the radiation issue, but again, like literally just like, put a meter of rock between you and the sky and you're fine. Like, and there's lots of rock on Mars. So like that part's pretty easy to solve, actually. Um, but I
did we
suspect a
lose
lot
you?
of the
Oh, you're over
settlement.
there. Okay. Yeah.
I suspect a lot of the settlements will be done not for immediate economic gain, but more for ideological reasons of people who want to get as far from Earth as they can so that they can just kind of live in peace for, without being bothered, right? And
Gotcha.
there
I think
are,
sooner or later there will have to be some kind of returns coming out of any moon colony or any Martian colony. And again, that's not guaranteed. It wasn't guaranteed we're going to find like a passage to the north, a new passage to India, but like the Spanish crown was quite willing to finance Christopher Columbus's effort at it. But the
sure,
thing is we discovered after they're okay, well, they've got gold here. Well, they've got like, a lot of wood here. They've got
right.
Spices,
here,
cocoa. Yeah.
But
spices,
of course,
etc.
like you don't know until you go looking what you're going to find, right?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
I find a lot of the skeptic naysayer.
Well, the robots have scoured the surface. It's not like we don't
No, they
know
have.
with
No, what are you
100%.
talking about? What are
Okay,
you
the
talking
robots
about?
have
Al?
scoured a very
They
tiny part of the surface. I mean,
Sure,
I could
but
land
it's not.
something.
so
The robots have scoured a little
so
bit.
first of all,
Yeah.
the robot. Okay, so our orbiters have
Yeah.
mapped the system pretty good
Gotcha.
of Mars and a number of others.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not saying
surface
the robots have
rovers
figured everything out, by the way. I'm saying that
surface
they've uncovered
rovers
a
have
little bit. Yeah.
explored an extremely small fraction of the surface and have dug centimeters deep, I think.
Yeah.
So like, to say that Mars is fully explored is just like wrong. And
It's
the
not
only
fully
way,
explored, but we know.
and
Yeah, it's not
the only
fully
way to do
explored, but
it, the only way to
yeah.
do it is to send people in relatively large numbers of them. The point is, we don't know exactly what we're going to find, right? If we let that sort of like, oh, we don't know that there's anything useful out there, therefore we won't go. And then the Chinese say, fuck it, we're going to go. And then they find something incredibly valuable. Like, well, like, I guess we're fucked, right? Like, maybe there's absolutely nothing of value anywhere in the solar system. And it turns out the only tiny location with anything valuable anywhere in the entire universe is our planet. And like, wouldn't that be an amazing coincidence? I doubt that's the case.
Well, I don't quite go that far.
It's a pretty
Yeah.
big universe out there,
Yeah.
And like I said, it's so much of it comes down to the level of technology you're working with, and how long it takes to get from point A to point B,
Gotcha.
how expensive it is to get into orbit, how expensive it is to get from one planet to another.
Gotcha.
How easy it is to support large numbers of humans, all these things. In order to develop that, you have to do it, right? Like you don't just
Right.
Sure. I'm pretty sure
and to a large degree,
volunteers willing to do it.
You'll find volunteers to do it. Yeah, there's people. There's people who
there's a lot of
there's
a lot of things that like actually like as you start bootstrapping the infrastructure, like things start getting rapidly a lot easier. So to give an example relevant to Mars settlement, there's the concept of a cycler, right?
Gotcha.
Have you heard of that? Have you heard of a cycler?
A cycler, please enlighten us.
So, okay, so your first trip to Mars, you send, a rocket or like a whole fleet of them, and it's got to like fly there, ends up in orbit, land. But another thing you can do is you set it into an orbit that will take it out to Mars, and then take it back to Earth, and then take it back to Mars, and then take it back to Earth, sort of periodically, with like the orbit might be like a couple of years long or something like that.
Gotcha.
But it'll constantly, it'll come, it'll return without any more fuel being added, right? And you can add to that structure as it goes on. Each time it comes by, the next wave of settlers goes up, and they glom onto it. And, there's all the open living space in it, and atmosphere and water and all that for them to use. And they come up there with their food and their own atmosphere and water. Add to this, okay? And they leave their habitats attached to this on their trip out, and it comes back and it's bigger. It's even bigger yet, so it can bring even more people for the next phase out. You can have multiple cyclers orbiting, so you have like a whole long chain of them between Earth and Mars. And the point is, like, the marginal cost of this thing is basically nothing. It's like once you built that structure, it's just there. Anyone can use it, right? And it will persist more or less indefinitely. It's in a stable orbit. Maybe something might happen in the course of millions of years, but you could come back 1,000 years later and it would still probably be there, unless someone moved it. So that's just like one example of the kinds of infrastructure that you can build that make the process of getting around in the solar system much, much cheaper than it is before you built that infrastructure. And similar arguments apply to like things like space elevators. To build a space elevator is stupendously expensive. But once you have it, it's a couple $100 gets you to orbit. Like, sweet, and once you're in orbit, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system. Oh, and by the way, since the space elevator is essentially like a long moment arm, like a bolo that you whip around your head, right? It's a similar kind of concept. So, similarly, you have like a polo, you got like a projectile on the end of that, you whip it, goes pretty fast, right? Because of that extended moment arm. You can use the space elevator to launch things, just using the Earth's own momentum, which is, like extremely cheap. So once you have that, like you're not only getting to orbit faster, but you have a way to like launch things into the other solar system that's much, much cheaper than it was before. But you got to build all this stuff, and like whoever builds it, they're the ones who end up dominating in that environment. And because they dominate in that environment, they will dominate the internal environments as well, right?
It's an interesting thought experiment.
So, to sort of bring it back to the economics of it.
Gotcha.
You can say, okay, well, mining things out there isn't likely to be directly competitive with mining things on Earth. You're probably correct about that.
Yep.
But so the ones who go out there and figure out how to mine things and manufacture things out in space, who live out there, they're like the steppe nomads now of the void, right? And they kind of spread around, and this kind of like high energy humanity, because like they're living at like the top of the gravity well. And like I said, they can drop things on the Earth. They have a massive military. Anyone who's on the ground, huge military.
The thing is, right?
So from their perspective, like, okay, so economically, right? It actually ends up being pretty easy to extract resources economically from the Earth now, because you can like literally just hold them at gunpoint, right? Like,
I mean, in terms of like the steppe nomad example, pastoral society and agricultural society. Pastoral societies actually have been around, I would say, longer than the agricultural societies. But in terms of like the example of, well, these guys, I don't know, the true believers, let's call them the true believers. They go out and they're like, well, let's figure out a way. The thing is, right, on Earth right now, what's the reality? The reality is that the majority of human beings, we get our energy from oil, coal, and natural gas, right? We tried nuclear for a while. I think nuclear peaked at like 2,700 terawatt hours globally, right? So it's not just America's
Yeah,
fault,
because
right?
like
And
the Greens keep insisting we
but
can't
but
build
but
any
okay,
more. There's
but
no
sir,
technological reason.
but the thing is,
There's so much uranium.
everyone,
Like we could power our civilization for centuries, if not millennia to
the
come
problem with
on
nuclear
known reserves.
the problem with nuclear is that it's not just the Americans and the Europeans, the Chinese and the Russians and all these other guys. You can check their nuclear numbers. Their nuclear numbers plateaued right about the same time, which is late 90s, early 2000s, right? It's the same problem. The problem is, okay, nuclear fission, hooray, we can make the bomb. Amazing. Let's have nuclear, right? But when it comes to as an energy source, it's way more expensive, right? Like if I waved a magic wand and everyone had nuclear energy,
So why are
their
they? So
energy
why are they?
bills.
So Ahnaf, why are they
Yeah,
using
go
it
for
for
it.
AI data clusters?
They'll use it for all kinds of like the thing is a science project is not the same as something that's
No, but
economic.
like,
Yeah, yeah.
no. I'm going to press you on this.
Oh, go ahead.
AI
What you
data,
were
well, AI data clusters need cheap energy, right? Like that's just not negotiable for them because they are so powerful, right? They will. So the guys building those are going to use whatever the cheapest energy source they can find. Why are they all going nuclear?
well, they're gonna do it for a while until they can't, right? Like you can check China, for example, which
Yes,
has
but they're doing it now, which is decades after you said it peaked because of I don't know resource limitations or whatever. But like
so
no,
okay, I'm talking about the
they're
global
building
number.
these
Yeah,
they
yeah,
are
yeah. I'm
building
talking about the
these
global
now.
number.
Why are they
Yeah, yeah.
going for
I'm talking
that?
about
Why are they
sure,
going
sure,
for
sure.
that? If they're trying to get the cheapest energy they can,
Sure,
and
sure,
this is
sure.
the cheapest way they can find to generate large amounts of energy,
Sure,
right? Then like
sure.
what does that tell us? Right?
What that tells us is that China is in the growth phase right now, right? That's basically what that tells us. If you look at the American number, right?
I'm not talking about China. I'm talking about like data clusters, like data centers being
Sure,
built in the US right now.
sure, sure. Yeah, I mean the Americans are going to build some of this stuff until they can't. That's what it is, right? Like the
But
American
but
nuclear power generation right now,
but
like
they're
I can
built
tell you
but
what
they
the
are
I yeah,
but they're building them right now. And like the answer is that
sure,
like it is
sure,
actually the cheapest way, and it's the cheapest way because like the combination of the technological infrastructure you need to do it and the availability of the necessary fuel is sort of like it's at the
it's
sweet
that's
spot.
an interesting that's an interesting interpretation.
There's
Like my
also
interpretation, yeah, yeah,
there's also we have
yeah, yeah.
reactor designs now, which I think
Gotcha.
have been proven in the laboratory but haven't been scaled up
Sure,
yet. That can take what we refer to as nuclear waste and
sure,
extract most of it because 95% of the available radioactive energy is
sure.
still in those spent nuclear fuel rods, right? So we actually have designs that can take those and use up basically like the rest of that energy, which dramatically reduces
Okay,
the half-life of the like it's much less radioactive. Now, output is very toxic and difficult to handle
yeah,
and
people are
is
gonna die
like
basically. Yeah, yeah,
large in volume. No, I mean not necessarily, it depends if you're careful about it.
yeah, yeah,
Like, there's always complications. But the point is like
sure,
here, even the supposed waste, it turns out
sure.
can be turned into a fuel source
Okay,
thanks to a
okay.
technological advancement, right? So like, I mean, I don't
Well, that's
whenever
an
I see
interesting.
anyone who knows what they're talking about on this subject, they're like,
Yeah, yeah,
they're adamant that we have at least thousands, if not millions of years worth
sure.
of uh, available fuel reserves that we can harvest
Okay,
right here on
so
Earth
I think
using
yeah, okay,
just using
yeah,
nuclear
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fission technology, right?
Sure, sure, sure.
So
Okay.
like,
We have to understand something here, right? There's a nuance here. We have to understand. Like when Rome fell apart, it wasn't because they didn't figure out stuff, right? Underneath the feet that they were marching on, there was all that oil, all that coal, all that natural gas. For any civilization, right? It's like, when you're playing a video game and there's a technology tree. As you go down the technology tree, you can only focus on one branch of the tree at a time, right? And then when you reach the end, you basically, that's kind of it, right? Now, is there a way to, I don't know, the nuclear waste in the rods and whatever? Okay, is there a way to reuse it? Is there a way to do something with it? Maybe, perhaps, right? But is it going to be something that's achieved this century? I don't think so. Simply because all the trends indicate right now, like I sent you like a nuclear power generation chart. I mean, America's been what? Late 90s, it's been like level or flat. China actually is the only society right now, the only big society where like they're still growing, right? So I think the last number I checked, they were at 400 terawatt hours in 2023, 434, and they're going to increase a bit more. But that's really it. It's like most people are resorting back to other stuff. So like natural gas, they're resorting to like, I think nowadays they call it clean coal.
Okay,
Then they're using,
so just on the technology,
but the point I'm trying to make, just to finish my point here.
Okay.
Yeah, just to finish the point here. The point I'm trying to make is that technology is not an exogenous force, right? Technology is something which is, it has trade-offs, it has cost, it has people, right? So I always talk about like the triadic relationship. You've got energy, you've got technology, and then you've got people, right? So if energy and people are too adversely affected, people actually, they use a certain, they use a certain technology and they're like, okay, well, this is not working anymore. Let's try something else, right? And they revert back to something older, or they revert to something that's more like a hybrid of like old and new, right?
Okay.
So,
so
that's basically what's
trees,
happening right now with the Americans.
Technology trees do not work like in video games where
sure.
You
It was an analogy.
End,
yeah. It's an analogy. I'm not saying
analogy.
life's a video game. I'm not saying life's a video game. Yeah.
You reach the end of the tech tree in the video game because that's as far as the programmer's imagination went, But like in real life, it does not work that way. It's like technology is massively combinatorial. Like one technological idea ends up like inspiring another technological idea. Sometimes you're able to like leapfrog certain stages. That's the first thing. The second thing is just like on the energy thing. Like I said, like we have so much more than we're using.
Sure.
The reprocessing technology that I was talking about is not some science fiction speculation. Molten salt reactors exist. Like that's been developed. It's just a matter of like building them at scale. And the main reason that doesn't happen is NIMBYism and regulatory. Again, like it's not that we can't. It's that like the government doesn't want to let us do it. And like not to get too conspiratorial, but I cannot help but notice that we seem to be globally under the influence of Malthusians, the old banking families and like the Club of Rome people and such. And they seem to really go out of their way in order to slow technological development, in order to impede the deployment of various kinds of technologies, in order to lock down resources that can't be used. Famous example of that is the oil reserves up in Alaska, which the federal government has been just refusing to let anyone drill for decades, right? Like supposedly these oil reserves are sort of comparable to Saudi Arabia or something. Like it's huge, but they're just like, nope, no one can drill there. Screw you. And then they turn around and say, oh no, we're running out of oil. But I do find it very funny. I do find it very funny that the same people that will say like, oh, we're running out of oil, and then they also turn around and say, oh, also, you can't burn too much of it because it'll cause the earth to heat up too much. So we're not going to let you drill for oil. And it's like, well, if we were actually running out of oil, like wouldn't this be a non-problem? It's like we're gonna run out, so global warming's not gonna happen, right?
I think the
just
sales pitch they
now,
make.
now,
Yeah,
now China.
I
Now
think
China.
go for it.
In the case of China, okay, they're using coal because like coal really is extremely cheap. It's very
Oh yeah.
abundant.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yep.
like even like the coal reserves even in Europe have not been used up. I mean, the German government, by the way, the Greens have twisted the arm of the German government into not only closing down German coal mines, but backfilling them with concrete so that they can never be reopened. Like, you have like the coal mines in the US that the government just kind of like just shut down. Just like, no, you can't mine that anymore. Like, like it's still, the coal is still there. There's still plenty of it.
Sure.
Same in England, and the excuse given is that it's too dirty or whatever, but the Chinese don't give a fuck. So like they're like, whatever.
Well, the Chinese,
like, we'll just burn the dirtiest coal we can find and the dirtiest method we can. It's the cheapest way. And like, I think it probably is cheaper and frankly technologically a lot easier to have a coal furnace than it is to set up a nuclear reactor. Which is probably one of the reasons the Chinese have kind of like gone in that direction. But if you want extremely cheap energy, which is extremely clean, nuclear is kind of the way to go. There's so much uranium in the Earth's crust that we've got tons of it to use. So we're not going to run out anytime soon. So
it's not a question.
I don't find the resource restriction argument convincing. Gotcha. It looks to me much more like the resources are sort of being somewhat deliberately constrained for whatever reason.
I wish life were that simple. The thing is, right? Look, there's always
I'm gonna leave soon. So I'm gonna make.
No worries.
Going almost 3 hours. I'm getting hungry.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Time flies.
Yeah, it does. I'm getting hungry / hangry. But
no worries.
So
I was
earlier talking about like space exploration. We were kind of touched on like
everything. We touched on everything basically.
Yeah, but like so touched on this concept of like like the pastoralists of the void, right? So one of the reasons I think that world governments have been a bit hesitant about getting into space,
gotcha,
in a serious way, is once you've seeded populations of humans outside of the Earth's gravity well who are self-sustaining indefinitely, they will expand. They'll go and settle other places and stuff. Like the numbers will grow. It's just the way of things. And due to the travel times involved, which even with greatly improved technology is still probably months to years to travel to the outer solar system, for example.
Sure.
Even if we could go much faster than we can now. So that makes political control basically impossible. So they become independent very quickly. If you are in the business of trying to lock down the Earth in a sort of global managerial state, as we know, our own ruling class in the West, that's been their project now for about 100 years at least. Wouldn't this be the very last thing that you would want to happen? You should think of all this infrastructure to sort of like control the entire human species. Why would you create your own external barbarians? Once your global superstate has been erected, there are no external barbarians anywhere on the earth to destabilize you, right? Which is generally how decadent empires fall apart. because they get invaded by barbarians. But there are no barbarians, and you never fall apart. I guess that would be the theory, right? But if you won't create them, I guess you fuck yourself eventually. You're going to invade. So you wouldn't really want to do that. And the only thing that you would be interested in doing in space would be communications and surveillance satellites, which is what they've been doing. So, I do kind of wonder if the space program has kind of been vectored away from manned space exploration and settlements, more or less exactly for that reason, just to the sheer politics, So that's the last thing I wanted to say on that.
No worries.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, the thing is, in every human society, there's always been rich, powerful, and influential people. And, Potter and myself, we kind of had this conversation on Telegram last night. But there's always been people trying to gain the levers of power and influence. Napoleon, famously, he tried to collapse the Russian economy before the invasion, right? And he used Polish and Jewish people, bankers, merchants, and whatnot. They basically fucked up the stock market, and the original plan, quote unquote, was to invade when everything was fucked up, right?
Yeah, geez, that sounds very familiar.
Yeah, so basically,
almost like they tried that again.
So
roll it with the anti-Semitism, guys.
No, but the thing is, right? Like, do I say that rich people, powerful, and influential people, they don't plot and plan? They absolutely do. They absolutely do. But the normal outcome for these things, if we look at human history, is that they implement their plan, they get a partial success, but what happens in the successive events is that they destroy the asabiya, right? The glue that holds society together, right? And basically they have to run for the exits, which we're seeing right now. Like Jake Sullivan, I'm sorry to say this, folks, but Jake Sullivan and all these other guys, they're not going to be in government soon. Like, this guy is selling Patriot missile defenses to Ukraine. Sorry, not to Ukraine, but to Saudi Arabia, South Korea. He gets their money, and then he's like, oh, thanks for the money. We're just going to send it to Ukraine anyways, right? So this is not a confident person. This is a person who's going to make a run for it. I don't expect, like, like when we had Malcolm on the show, Malcolm was like, if it's correct that George Soros in his Zio bunker, or whoever it is planning all this and he's implementing this, that's actually a more optimistic outcome. The pessimistic outcome is that, yeah, he plans this, he implements this, he gets a success, then it fucking fails, and then there's just chaos and anarchy. And I think this other outcome of chaos and anarchy is what's going to happen more. The surveillance state, these types of people are going to do what they want to do. There's going to be true believers who, I don't know, they want
I think that's already falling apart on them, frankly.
Yeah.
Like we were saying earlier in the podcast, the way
they're not succeeding.
They're getting very hysterical, very sort of panicky.
Yeah.
I mean, like these plots to try to conquer the world, they always fail because you can't conquer. Like you can't conquer the entire system. When you try to do that, you end up generating resistance, friction that gradually degrades your ability, whether it's the internal loss of asabiya in your own society due to the repressive measures that you have to take, or whether it's due to people on the outside getting pissed off at you and
of course.
getting together.
And these people,
right.
Absolutely good search on. And these people, they're always going to exist, and they're always going to have some measure of success, but they're never going to get the entire system. That's the problem, right?
No.
The problem is not the lizard people or George Soros or all these other guys finally conquering the world. The problem is that they're going to attempt whatever, they're going to fail, and then the plate and the cutlery and everything is shattered and it's on the floor, and then everyone else is holding the bag for it. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly. I completely agree. we're already pretty much like living in the consequences of that, right? You just have to look at the state of your typical.
I mean, ask Napoleon
American or Western European city. It's where the social order has been shattered. The cities are just dirty, crime-ridden, drugs everywhere, homeless people all over the place. Totally. Anyway,
So
let's,
I mean, ask Napoleon.
let's-
Ask Napoleon. Ask Napoleon what happened when his Polish and Jewish friends did a conspiracy to let him conquer the world. It did not end well for him when he went to Russia.
Yeah.
Getting
involved in a land war in Russia is generally a terrible idea, as the Swedes, the French, the Germans have all found out. There.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I guess the Mongols are the only ones who
well, they attacked from the opposite direction. They attacked from the opposite. Yes.
Yeah, they came
attacked
in
from
through the south of Russia. That's like much easier than coming in through the north.
Yeah. So and from the east instead of coming from the west, meaning the Russians couldn't just retreat back into the steppe, because that was enemy territory.
I mean, my future, the way I view the future, I mean, Sir John is a true believer. He believes in space and that kind of stuff. My vision of the future is nomadic societies and war bands of men just like grabbing the girls. That's basically what's going to happen. Like, you're going to see these big cities, Seoul, North Korea, whatever.
Why not both? It's like, honestly, it's a big world, and I mean, like,
yeah, I mean, I could see America.
Both of these things can happen.
Yeah, I could see America declining while the BRICS countries which now have or are working on a stable currency that's tied to something besides fiat. I could see them.
I mean, you say that, but like, I mean, like, let's look at the BRICS countries, right? There is only time to do that because I do want to get going. It's like it's
no worries.
But Brazil, please. Russia, maybe, yeah, okay. In India, yeah, okay, superpower by 2030. Okay, whatever you say. China's got, they've got some good things going for them. They also got a lot of their own problems. And what's the S4? Oh yeah, right. South Africa, sure.
Okay, South Africa's got loads of resources. I'll grant you that human capital.
You know what else? The human capital is kind of a big issue there. India kind of has a similar issue. Brazil has a very similar issue. Like, America, say what you will about it, has a lot of good human capital still. Has a fuck ton of resources. Could basically be an autarky. If it wanted to, has some of the world's most navigable waterways. Gotcha. America is actually, if you look at it, like, geopolitically, it's OP. Like, it's ridiculously
totally
OP.
See in the event of like an American loss, an American autarky rising that was essentially like, screw you guys, we're staying here. We're just going to stay in America.
Well, no, I mean, what I was saying is that that's not how it plays out. It's more like, screw you guys, we're going to space. That's sort of, it's like the thalassocracy. Thalassocracy? I think I've been saying it the wrong time.
Thalassocracy.
It is thalassocracy, okay. Kind of, that falls apart, because the Russians and the Chinese aren't going to let them do that anymore. Okay, fine. We give up the sea empire. That's done. But you can't stop us from going to space, motherfuckers. And like, that becomes kind of the new thing. Anyhow, guys, I gotta go.
No worries.
Totally
thank you for your time.
That. Thank you so much for showing up, and let's just give it our send-off.
Thanks.
Your soul is mine.
No!
Fatality.